Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Kira Steger. Kira Steger was born on November 19, 1982, in Des Plaines, Illinois. She was the daughter of Marcy and Jay Kira, who described her as a bubbly, dedicated, and sweet person. Kira worked at the Mall of America, where she held positions at two stores, Wet Seal and, most recently, Delia's. Her co-workers were not only her best friends but also her family. She had a unique ability to see strengths in others that they had not yet seen. Kira had planned a bright and peaceful future. Unfortunately, her dreams came to an abrupt end when Kira mysteriously disappeared. On Thursday, February 21, 2013, Kira had a shift. Her co-workers said she was feeling well and had plans to go out to dinner at a fancy restaurant with her husband, Jeffery Trevino, after work. Kira and Jeffery met 3 years ago and quickly fell in love. Kira and Jeffery began a romantic relationship and eventually married, forming a happy and stable couple. Although they sometimes disagreed, they resolved everything in private, without letting anyone know about these disagreements. 2 days later, on Saturday, February 23, when Kira failed to show up for work, her co-workers became concerned because this was unlike her. Kira was always punctual, strict with herself and others, never late, and always kept to a schedule. When Kira could not be reached, her co-workers called Jeffery, but he did not know where his wife was. Jeffery said that Kira had left home the morning before and had not returned. He was not too worried because Kira had a habit of occasionally being absent for a day or two, often staying overnight at friends' or relatives' houses without notice. However, the bad weather with heavy snow that day may have worried him. Jeffery thought that something might have happened to her on the road. Perhaps her car broke down and her cell phone ran out of battery. That same day, not receiving any news from his wife, Jeffery reported her missing and contacted Kira's family. Her family was shocked by the mysterious disappearance of their loved one, and this was a huge shock for them. After receiving the report of Kira Steger's disappearance, detectives immediately began investigating. Investigators began by questioning Jeffery and searching the nearby area. Detectives went to Jeffery's home to talk to him. Jeffery said that on Thursday, he and Kira wanted to spend time together. They had dinner, talked, went bowling, and then left the mall. According to Jeffery, they both went home soon after because Kira planned to watch a movie. Jeffery also told the detectives that his wife had left the house the following morning, Friday, around 8:30. A meeting had been scheduled at work that she had to attend. Kira was acting normally, and Jeffery did not notice anything unusual. Jeffery did not find anything unusual about Kira's occasional disappearances, although he did not know where she went or who she was spending time with. Jeffery said that they had been having relationship problems for the past few months. However, he did not find it serious or alarming, but rather viewed it as the usual small arguments that occur in every family. The detective asked Jeffery about who Kira might be seeing and whether she was in any other relationship. Jeffery dismissed this idea, as he had asked Kira directly and she had denied it. According to Jeffery, he truly loved Kira and trusted her. Investigators turned over all the information they had gathered about Kira and her car to the patrol team. Detectives also went directly to the Mall of America to verify Jeffery's statements and look for clues. The Mall of America, located in Bloomington, is one of the largest malls in the world, with 520 stores, an amusement park, an aquarium, a movie theater, a golf course, and many other amenities. The mall has numerous security cameras, so detectives reviewed the footage of Kira leaving the company on February 21. The video did not show anything unusual. Jeffery's initial statement was very credible. He met Kira after work. They stayed in the mall for a while, then went down to the parking lot and left. There was no argument, and the evening went smoothly. Waiting without knowing what had happened was difficult, and each passing day made Kira's family more and more worried about her safety. With no word from her, Kira's family traveled to Bloomington to help with the investigation. They printed flyers with Kira's picture on them, posted them on utility poles, and handed them out to passers-by. Their goal was to attract as much attention as possible to find Kira. They knew they couldn't just stand by and had to take action to find their loved one. While Kira's family was handing out flyers, the investigators continued their investigation. While interviewing neighbors, the police discovered a surveillance camera on a neighbor's home. The camera was pointed at Kira and Jeffrey's home. The investigators asked the homeowner to copy the footage from the camera because they hoped to find clues in it. Meanwhile, records from a cell phone company provided them with a new lead. According to phone records, Kira was in a relationship with someone other than Jeffrey. That person was Ryan Wendt, the manager of the chain of stores where she worked. They had a deep relationship and corresponded frequently. Police determined that Ryan had left the state and that when the search for Kira began, Ryan was driving to Colorado. This man was closely related to the investigation because, in addition to his relationship with Kira, he was out of state at the time of her disappearance. It could be a coincidence, or there could be something else going on behind his departure. Investigators needed answers. After several attempts, detectives were able to contact Ryan. He said the last time he had contact with Kira was when he was driving through South Dakota and texting her. These messages were sent shortly before Kira went missing. After reviewing the timestamps, detectives determined that Kira had contacted her new lover while she was having dinner with her husband. The messages showed that Kira had become increasingly distant from Jeffrey. Investigators ran a cell tower location check on Ryan's phone and checked his credit card statements. The results showed that he was indeed out of state that night and had no connection to Kira's disappearance. As a result, Ryan was released and cleared as a suspect. The timestamps on the messages showed that Kira was still texting Ryan even after she returned home to her husband. However, after 11:44 p.m., their conversation stopped, and Kira's phone was no longer active. Meanwhile, another investigation team was preparing to review video from a surveillance camera installed at Kira's neighbor's home. The camera captured most of the street scene from left to right. However, it rotated so quickly that it was difficult to observe. If the camera saw something suspicious, it immediately moved in another direction. Jeffrey and Kira's house was only visible for a few seconds when the camera panned to the right. Jeffrey said that after dinner and bowling, he and Kira went home, watched a movie, and went to bed. However, when investigators reviewed the footage, they discovered that just after 2 a.m., Kira's car backed into the driveway. Because the footage was poor and the camera kept moving, it was difficult to determine exactly what was happening at that time. The car then left the house. Jeffrey explained that Kira had asked him to fill up her car with gas for work the next day, so he went to the gas station. Surprisingly, this story was true. He was seen at the gas station around 3:30 a.m. However, detectives discovered that after leaving the gas station, he headed toward the highway instead of home. It is unclear where Jeffrey went next. The neighbor's camera did not record him returning, but this may have been a coincidence since the camera was always moving. Therefore, in theory, Jeffrey could have gotten home later since the camera was capturing a different angle. When investigators reviewed the video, they saw Kira's Chevrolet leave at 9:21 a.m. Unfortunately, they couldn't determine who was driving. A missing person report was filed on Saturday, February 23rd, and on Monday, February 25th, police received a call about a suspicious car parked near the shopping center where Kira worked. There are 2 multi-story parking lots there. A security guard found the car parked for several days and asked for it to be towed. When the driver inspected the car before towing it, He noticed suspicious red stains on the trunk lid and immediately called the police. That car turned out to be Kira's white car. Although there wasn't much blood, just a few small stains, it was still very concerning. In the car, they found Kira's wallet and a divorce form downloaded from the internet. Additionally, a dark object in the snow behind the car caught the attention of the investigators. As they approached, they found a rolled-up trunk mat with dark stains. DNA testing confirmed that it was Kira Steger's blood. The investigators were devastated to realize that Kira was most likely dead. This heartbreaking news was a huge shock to her family and friends. Their last hope of seeing Kira again was dashed, leaving them with questions. How did she die? Was she in pain? Who could hate her enough to take her life? The fact that Kira's body had not been found added to the confusion, as the endless grief seemed unlikely to be alleviated. The detectives made it a top priority to find out who had left the car in the parking lot. The car left the house at 9:21 a.m., and about 20 minutes later, it was caught on a mall camera. There were no cameras in the parking lot where the car was found, but another camera recorded the road leading to the lot, which was located near where Kira's car was parked. After reviewing the camera footage, detectives found that a hooded man appeared a few minutes after Kira's white Chevrolet pulled into the lot. It was cold enough that it was not unusual for him to be wearing a hoodie, but detectives wanted to learn more about where he went. The hooded man was seen walking across the street and approaching a taxi stand. He briefly chatted with a driver, then got into a cab and drove away. Police were able to determine the company that owned the taxis in the mall parking lot. Based on the time he spent talking to the drivers, police were able to determine the license plate numbers. All of the taxis had GPS tracking devices, which showed that the man ended up about a block away from Kira and Jeffrey's house and left after paying in cash. As the taxi left the neighborhood, it was caught on camera, the same camera that had filmed part of Kira and Jeffrey's house. 2 minutes later, a man in a hoodie entered the frame. The low resolution of the video made it difficult to identify his face, but the white logo on his shirt was clearly visible. As investigators continued to examine the video, they saw the man enter Kira and Jeffrey's house. Kira was missing, leading to suspicions that the hooded man might be Jeffrey. After obtaining a search warrant, the police went to the house. At first, the house looked normal and unremarkable. However, upon closer inspection, forensic experts discovered dark red stains in Kira and Jeffrey's bedroom. There were several on the wall near the bed and about 100 on the mattress. It was clear that the bedroom had been rearranged and cleaned recently. When the forensic team sprayed luminol, the carpeting glowed. There were bloodstains throughout the house that were not visible to the naked eye. The bloodstains originated in the bedroom and extended to other areas of the house. Forensic testing confirmed that the blood belonged to Kira, leading investigators to believe that she was no longer alive. In addition to searching the house, police also searched Jeffrey's car. There were no bloodstains or signs of a struggle. However, they found one interesting detail: a gas station receipt in Jeffrey's car, dated 1 hour and 40 minutes before Kira's car was abandoned in the mall parking lot. According to the receipt, the transaction was made using Jeffrey's card. Detectives went to the gas station to review the security cameras. The camera recorded Jeffrey filling up with gas, then going inside to withdraw money from an ATM. The video clearly showed Jeffrey's face and a logo on his jacket that looked similar to the logo on the man in the earlier footage. With video evidence and all the evidence in the house, Jeffery Trevino, 39, was arrested. He was taken to the police station for questioning and is now the prime suspect. Immediately after being released from the interrogation room, Jeffrey contacted a lawyer and was advised to exercise his right to remain silent. The police had enough evidence to charge him, but the most compelling evidence was Kira's body. no one suspected Kira was dead at the time. Police, Kira's family, and volunteers searched for her for months. In late March, as the snow melted, a volunteer found a strange bag on the edge of Keller Lake a few miles from Jeffrey's house and called the police. The bag contained a bloody pillow, a shirt, and a bra. The forensic team linked these items to Kira because her DNA was found on them. The lake remained frozen, hampering the search. However, when divers surveyed the water, they found no remains. The area around the lake was searched several times with 4 cadaver dogs, trained to find dead bodies, but to no avail. 2.5 months after Kira's disappearance, on May 8, 2013, the St. Paul Police Department received a disturbing call. The caller reported that he had seen what appeared to be a body in the Mississippi River. Police discovered and recovered a body. The body was naked. Dental records identified it as Kira Steger. She had suffered severe trauma to the forehead and a broken left index finger. Because the body was so badly decomposed, the medical examiner was unable to determine the exact cause of death. Using new evidence, investigators attempted to reconstruct a timeline of the events leading up to Kira's death and the events that followed. They believed that when Kira and Jeffrey returned home, Jeffrey found her texting with someone else. When Kira refused to show her husband the messages, he snatched the phone from her and broke her fingers. After reading the romantic messages, Jeffrey became even angrier, and in a fit of rage, he killed Kira and tried to cover up the crime. He drove Kira's car to the house, put the body in the trunk, then went to the gas station before taking the body to the riverbank and dumping it. He then returned home, discarding the bag containing Kira's pillow and clothes along the way. The next morning, he went to the gas station to withdraw cash from an ATM, knowing that after leaving Kira's car in the shopping center car park, he would need cash to pay for a taxi. After leaving Kira's car, Jeffrey went home and spent the day cleaning. He tried to make it look like Kira had driven away that morning and that nothing had happened. However, this plan was foiled by surveillance cameras. In October 2013, a jury convicted Jeffery Trevino, 39. They accepted that his actions were not intentional and that they were the result of a heated after discovering that his wife was having an affair. Before the judge handed down his sentence, Kira's family spoke out. "This monster was a calculating criminal," said Carrie and Steger, Kira's sister. "He deserves no mercy." Kira's mother, Marcy, said Jeffrey showed no sympathy for her daughter. "He dumped my daughter like a piece of trash into the most polluted water in the country," she said. But her father, Jay, said, "No punishment can ever make up for the pain Jeffrey has caused our family. No amount of time for Jeffrey is enough, never enough," he said. In November 2013, Jeffery Trevino was sentenced to 27.5 years in prison. He will be eligible for parole in 2031. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Zoe Hastings. Zoe Hastings was born on November 21, 1996, in Kansas, as the oldest of 5 children. She was a responsible sibling, often putting her parents' needs before her own. Her family was deeply rooted in their faith, spending a significant amount of time at church. When Zoe was in high school, her family moved to Dallas, where she attended a school that fostered her creativity and passion for the arts. She excelled in drawing and enjoyed participating in school plays. Outside of school, Zoe worked at an art studio and as a lifeguard during her summer breaks. After graduating, Zoe had the opportunity to attend top universities, but she decided to delay her education to focus on her church. In October 2015, at the age of 18, Zoe was preparing for a mission trip with her church. She planned to attend the Sunday service to discuss the trip's details. Zoe left her house around 4:40 p.m. in the family minivan. promising her parents she would return for dinner. However, she failed to come back, which was unusual for her. Zoe's parents tried to reach her after the service, but she didn't respond to their messages or calls. They then contacted her friends, thinking she might have visited someone, but no one had seen her. As the evening wore on, her parents grew increasingly worried and decided to call the church to see if Zoe had shown up there. However, they were surprised to learn that Zoe had never arrived at the church. This was highly unusual behavior for Zoe, as she had always kept her parents informed of her current whereabouts and had never disappeared without explanation. So they drove themselves to the police station to report Zoe missing, and the police began the search. The police spent all night retracing the route from Zoe's house to the church but found no sign of Zoe. Using an iPhone tracking app, police were able to locate her phone. They discovered Zoe's phone just a few hundred yards from the church, near a small creek across the street. Zoe's parents rushed to the creek. An officer approached them and informed them that a car accident had been reported a few hours earlier and that police had received a call from a witness walking a dog. That witness claimed that a man had approached him and said that a woman had been injured in a car accident near the creek. The witness rushed to the scene and found a woman lying in a pool of blood, so he called 911. As the police investigated, they quickly identified the victim as Zoe Hastings. However, it soon became clear that she had not died as a result of the accident. The evidence suggested that she had been murdered. Zoe's body was found a short distance from the minivan, which was partially submerged in the creek. There was a significant amount of blood near her body, and police observed multiple cuts on her neck. Her dress was pulled up, and her underwear was rolled down, leading detectives to suspect that the killer had likely assaulted and abused her. The police prevented Zoe's parents from approaching her body, shielding them from the gruesome scene. As they investigated further, they discovered several clues. Notably, all the minivan doors except the driver's side were locked, suggesting that the perpetrator may have driven the vehicle themselves or approached Zoe directly at the scene. Beneath the bridge, about 10 feet from the creek, a blood-stained knife was discovered. It's likely that this was the weapon used in Zoe's murder. By examining her phone records and GPS data, investigators established that Zoe had arrived at the creek by 5:01 p.m. after leaving home at 4:41 p.m. GPS revealed she drove there in approximately 20 minutes, indicating her death probably occurred within a few minutes of arrival. To account for this timeline, investigators reconstructed her activities that afternoon, tracing her stops from leaving her home. During the examination, investigators uncovered evidence. Zoe visited the nearby DVD rental store after departing home. To return a DVD she borrowed from that rental shop situated beside a Walgreens, near her place of residence. More than 50 people near that area had confirmed it. Among them had been Lester Clark, a tattoo shop employee who had worked next door to the DVD store. It wasn't until a few hours after work around 4:45 p.m. that Lester revealed he had seen a female customer who had been shopping at the store and had approached her. Lester admitted to having witnessed Zoe going to the DVD rental store. Lester added that he saw a man behaving suspiciously near the crime scene. Lester described the man as short and heavily built, and African American. However, Lester was too far away to notice any other distinguishing features. Later that evening, Lester saw the same man walking towards the store alone. The second witness, Gary Whitman, a homeless man, corroborated Lester's account. At around 4:45 p.m., Gary saw a woman approaching a white minivan in the parking lot. A man then approached her from behind, preventing her from entering the vehicle. The man showed her something from his pocket, and the woman subsequently got into the car, moving to the passenger seat. The man then drove away. Gary also described the suspect as short and heavily built, and African American, and found the situation highly suspicious. He went into the store and asked the clerk to call 911, but it is unclear if the clerk made the call. During the investigation, experts made several key discoveries. A forensic pathologist examined Zoe's body and found a small amount of male semen, indicating that Zoe had been sexually assaulted before being murdered. However, the amount of semen was too small to conduct a full DNA analysis. Investigators analyzed Zoe's car for any foreign fingerprints on the doors or steering wheel, but found none. This discovery, combined with witness statements, suggested that the killer may have driven Zoe away in her minivan. However, the lack of fingerprints did not mean that the killer did not drive the car, as they may have wiped down the surfaces after the crime. When examining Zoe's body, investigators found several hairs, but they were too small to extract a full DNA sample from. However, a breakthrough came when a DNA sample was found on a knife near the crime scene. The DNA was matched to 34-year-old Antonio Cochran, who had a violent criminal history, including arrests for theft, assault, and home invasion. 1 year before the murder, Antonio was accused of sexually assaulting a 17-year-old girl, the daughter of his girlfriend. According to the girl, Antonio offered her a ride, but took her to a secluded area and assaulted her. He was arrested and claimed that the sex was consensual, but the prosecution was unable to prove his guilt, and he was acquitted. Antonio became the prime suspect in the murder investigation. As a result, he was arrested. However, during the interrogation, Antonio denied any involvement in the crime. To gather more evidence, investigators collected a DNA sample from Antonio and compared it to the semen found on the victim's body. Unfortunately, both DNA samples were too small for a full analysis, so the experts used a different method. The partial DNA profiles from the hair and semen were then compared to Antonio's DNA. The results showed that it was matched, but not definitively. Meanwhile, detectives searched Antonio's smartphone and found some incriminating text messages. On the day before the murder, Antonio sent a message to a friend he lived with, stating he was moving out and would never see him again. At 1:48 a.m. the next day, Antonio sent another message to his ex-girlfriend, telling her that his stepmother had died right in front of him. But this information was later found to be false. In the hour leading up to Zoe's death, Antonio sent 2 texts to another woman, revealing that he had been drinking, driving around the city, and crying. These messages were his last before the incident. Later that evening, at 9:30 p.m., Antonio texted a friend, expressing confusion and despair about his life. The next day, he sent a message to his ex-girlfriend, stating that his life was over and that she would soon understand why. Detectives investigating Antonio's online activities found that he had visited local news websites over 30 times before his arrest, with a particular focus on the crime sections. Notably, 5 of these access were directly related to articles about Zoe's murder. This was unusual, as prior to the death of Zoe, Antonio rarely visited news sites. His browser history also showed a single visit to a page about gang activity. Further investigation of Antonio's smartphone revealed GPS data that, at 4:34 p.m., Antonio's phone connected to a cell tower covering the area where the store was located, coinciding with the time Zoe was there. Although this data was not conclusive evidence, it suggested that Antonio's phone was in the vicinity of the store just minutes before Zoe left the parking lot. This was significant, as Antonio's home was far away, and his phone had been connected to a different nearby tower throughout the day. Detectives discovered that Antonio had started working at a grocery store just 3 days before the incident. However, on the day after the murder, he skipped his shift without providing any explanation. Despite the extensive circumstantial evidence against Antonio, the strongest evidence remained his DNA on the knife handle. Nevertheless, this evidence alone might not be enough for a conviction, as merely holding a knife does not prove involvement in the murder. It is possible that Antonio used the knife in a different context, and someone else could have used it to commit the crime. Since no other evidence was found, detectives decided to proceed with the case and take it to court. The prosecution presented its report of the events. According to the prosecution, Antonio approached Zoe in the parking lot, threatening her with a knife and forcing her to get into her car. He then took the driver's seat and drove away. The prosecution argued that Antonio, who was emotionally distressed due to the death of a relative and intoxicated from consuming a significant amount of alcohol. The investigators' theory was that Antonio had intended to assault Zoe when he abducted her. He chose his victim, Zoe, by chance when he spotted her in the parking lot. Antonio saw an opportunity to commit a crime and acted on it. He then drove to a secluded creek area that was difficult to spot due to the surrounding trees and low-lying terrain. At this location, he forced Zoe out of the car and attacked her, stabbing her 6 times in the neck area. Antonio got back into the car and tried to drive it into the creek, possibly to hide any remaining evidence. However, the car only partially submerged, allowing Antonio to potentially wipe his fingerprints from the steering wheel and door handle before fleeing the scene and return to the store, where Lester had seen him according to initial testimony. The defense argued that most of the evidence was not convincing enough and did not prove Antonio's guilt. For example, hair analysis only showed that the DNA could not be ruled out as belonging to Antonio. But it did not confirm his involvement. DNA on the knife also did not necessarily prove that Antonio committed murder. The defense argued that Antonio could have touched the knife under different circumstances before working at the store. They suggested he might have used the knife while working at a movie theater, where he sometimes collected items left behind by visitors. However, there was no evidence to support this claim. Furthermore, if someone had taken the knife from the theater and used it to commit the murder, they would have had to be careful to avoid removing Antonio's DNA from the handle, which would have been a difficult task. The defense attempted to downplay the testimony of the second witness, Gary, by revealing that Gary had a warrant for his arrest due to a parole violation. They tried to exclude Gary's testimony, but the prosecution argued that Gary's willingness to cooperate with police, despite the risk of arrest, proved his sincerity. Gary insisted he wanted to do the right thing, even if it meant getting arrested. Antonio's lawyers argued that their client was elsewhere at the time of Zoe's murder, in order to helping a friend, but they failed to provide any substantial evidence to support this claim. Initially, the prosecution sought the death penalty for Antonio, but as the trial progressed, they realized this would be difficult to achieve with the available evidence. They dropped the request for the death penalty. After a lengthy deliberation, the jury found Antonio guilty of murder and sentenced him to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 30 years. Zoe's parents expressed gratitude to the investigators and all those involved in the trial for delivering justice for their daughter. Her father shared that he had always warned his children about the dangers of the world and had taken every precaution to protect them. However, despite his efforts, his eldest daughter was abducted just a short distance from their home, and he was powerless to prevent it. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Cassandra Cantrell. Cassandra and Robert were twins. As children, Cassandra and Robert liked to tell each other scary stories in a room with the lights off. Robert was a talented storyteller. Cassandra always found Robert's stories interesting. In every story, Robert played a small but brave man. In addition, Cassandra and Robert also watched the animated series Scooby-Doo together. Although their mother, Mary Smith, did not share Cassandra's passion to instill in her children a love of reading, she bought them many books about scary stories. Loving horror stories was the passion of the two siblings. They even collected figurines of villains and, as adults, seriously considered opening a horror-themed bookstore. Not long after, Cassandra's interest in horror movies brought her to the studio in 2004. She got a cameo role in a scary movie that, although it did not become popular, still made Robert envious of Cassandra. Robert began asking Cassandra to make him a deal. Robert asked Cassandra to give him a role in the movie she was filming. Cassandra readily agreed. Robert was happy, but he couldn't play even a supporting role in a soap opera. The head of the cast in that movie was Colin Dudley, who had a crush on Cassandra since her first days in the movie. At the company Halloween party, Cassandra dressed as Velma from Scooby-Doo and Colin dressed as Alex from A Clockwork Orange. During the party, Colin walked around with a glass of milk all evening, glaring at everyone, just like his character did in the movie, and he also said a lot of quotes from the book. Finally, he stopped in front of Cassandra and said that her beauty made Colin want to destroy it. Cassandra thought it was a compliment and they quickly started dating. But their relationship didn't last long, only a few months. Colin found another actress named Rebecca and began dating her, after which Colin and Rebecca began living together. One day, on August 25, 2020, Cassandra Connell suddenly disappeared. When her mother, Mary Smith, tried to contact her, she did not answer the phone. Mary went to report the incident to the police, and a search was quickly launched. After several days of searching, police found her car under the bridge. Also, the bad news was that the car was unlocked and the keys were still inside. There was no reason for Cassandra to appear here. This place was considered a homeless shelter where violence often occurred. Officers had to go through the neighborhood questioning many homeless people. But none of them had ever seen Cassandra, and none of them knew when the car appeared here. The detective participating in the search for Cassandra requested to locate Cassandra's cell phone. The signal showed the phone was in the water closest to the bridge, which meant detectives wouldn't be able to recover it and couldn't get the information they needed. To search more closely, a team of divers was about to search the coastal area for Cassandra. Before starting, they stood on the shore, picked up rocks, and threw them into the water to gauge the distance they could throw. Cassandra's mother mentioned that Cassandra's phone case had rhinestones, making it easy to spot. The phone was soon found, but Cassandra's body was not. Mary expressed her grief, saying she had looked forward to being a grandmother soon and hadn't even had time to set up a crib for her expected grandchild, which was still in its box in the garage. She wondered what to do with it now, unknowingly providing important information for the investigation. According to statistics, many crimes against pregnant women are committed by their partners. However, Mary Smith did not know who Cassandra's boyfriend was. Cassandra was not married and didn't seem to be in a relationship, yet she was pregnant. Mary had no information about him, despite knowing that Cassandra often spoke to someone on the phone. However, the phone number was not saved in Cassandra's phone book. And Mary couldn't recall the number. It's common for girls to confide in at least one friend about their relationships, especially when it comes to something as significant as pregnancy. The police found such a friend, who revealed that Cassandra had reconnected with her ex-boyfriend, Colin Dudley. They had a brief relationship in 2004, but it was surprising that they rekindled their romance 15 years after breaking up. When Cassandra discovered she had been pregnant, she had hesitated to inform Colin. She had recalled an earlier conversation where he had expressed his disdain for having children, even expressing relief that his wife Rebecca had been infertile. Fearing a child would disrupt her relationship with Colin, Cassandra had kept her secret hidden. However, as her pregnancy had progressed, it had become more and more difficult to hide underneath the oversized clothes. To avoid arousing suspicion, Cassandra had stopped seeing Colin, even though she had known she couldn't keep the truth hidden forever. Cassandra decided it had been best to be honest with Colin. So she had told him over the phone that she had been pregnant with his child. Colin had been silent for a moment before replying that he had been happy about the news. Although his tone had seemed a bit off, Cassandra had believed he had truly felt happy. a detective visited Colin's house and knocked on the door. However, the person who had opened the door had been Rebecca, a detective who introduced herself as Colin's old friend and had asked to meet Colin. Without hesitation, Colin had stepped out from behind Rebecca, closed the door behind him, and walked out of the house with the detective. It had seemed like Colin had been expecting this conversation, even though the detective had yet to formally introduce himself. Colin told the detective that he appreciated the detectives for not revealing any information in front of Rebecca. Colin mentioned that he had heard about Cassandra's disappearance and found it strange, and said that he didn't know where she had gone. He explained that Cassandra had told him about a big argument with her brother, Robert. Colin had advised Cassandra to reconcile with Robert but was unsure whether she would take his advice. The detective already knew about the fight between Cassandra and Robert, as Colin had explained to the detective that it had been just a small family misunderstanding, even though Robert had been extremely upset about it. On the day she disappeared, Cassandra had called Colin and said she wanted to talk, but he had refused because of his ego. Now, Colin blamed himself for her disappearance, believing that if he had met her that day, she might not have disappeared. Colin admitted to the detective that he had not been the nicest person, that he had been secretly dating Cassandra behind Rebecca's back for a long time, and expressed his belief that he would probably be punished for it in the other world. Colin also shared that when his father had passed away in 2014, he had a deep hatred for Rebecca. Rebecca often clashed with her father Colin, accusing him of not understanding her. However, sometimes it turned out that it was actually Rebecca who didn't understand her father. After Colin's father had passed away, Colin had wanted to fulfill one of his wishes. His father had been right about some things, and Colin decided to rekindle his relationship with Cassandra. This meant Colin had to end things with Rebecca. Therefore, for 5 years, Colin had lived a double life, which was extremely difficult. Colin constantly made excuses to come home late, telling Rebecca about fake business trips. Colin even bought a fishing rod even though he didn't like fishing. Colin would tell Rebecca that he was going to the lake when in reality he was visiting Cassandra. To make his lie more believable, he bought fish from the supermarket and Rebecca would cook it, despite the fact that the smell of fish made him sick. Things took a surprising turn when Colin discovered that Cassandra was pregnant. Colin did not know who the father was, but Cassandra had confided in a close friend that it was Colin. Colin found this hard to believe. She wanted to have a family of her own with Colin, but this was something Colin could not provide for her. Colin assumed she had found someone else, and he assumed that was why Cassandra didn't want to see him anymore. The detective asked Colin when was the last time he had seen her. Colin honestly replied that he didn't remember, but it was probably about 3 or 4 months ago. Colin said that he had run into Cassandra at the mall, but only briefly because Rebecca was trying on clothes, and he had gotten tired of waiting so he walked to the coffee shop. Colin asked the police officer one last time if they had any chance of finding Cassandra alive. The detective replied that they were doing everything they could and asked Colin to believe him. This was not the last time Colin saw the detective. Although Cassandra's phone was unusable, police had obtained her call records. It turned out that the person Cassandra had been calling frequently was Colin Dudley. Cassandra had called him often, even on the day she went missing. Police also received CCTV footage from the railway station near where Cassandra's abandoned car was found. The video showed a suspicious man standing out among passengers on the platform. He was wearing a long coat, gloves, and a scarf covering his face. A wide-brimmed hat obscured his eyes, making it impossible for police to see his face clearly. However, the detective noted that the man's gait reminded him of Colin Dudley. The hat was similar to the one Colin had worn at the party playing a character in the movie A Clockwork Orange. After tracking the suspect via CCTV, detectives observed him briefly entering a coffee shop, only to leave a few minutes later and head towards the parking lot. There, He got into his car and drove away. Even though his face was obscured the entire time, detectives were still able to write down the license plate number. A search warrant was then issued and a unit was dispatched to Colin Dudley's residence. During the search of Colin's home, detectives hoped that Cassandra was still alive. At first, there was no evidence of a murder at Colin's house. However, in the wardrobe they find the hat that Colin had tried to hide. They then found a basement in his house. When the police went to the basement, they did not find Cassandra there and there was no evidence of a crime. However, the dog detected the smell of blood, became agitated and barked continuously. Colin insisted he did nothing illegal, claiming that the police had no evidence and no other suspects, so they were trying to frame him, and he claimed to be an innocent man. In search of more information, detectives interviewed Rebecca, who was shocked by the surprise search, the allegations against her husband, and the fact that she had been deceived for years. She said many things about Colin and her feelings, but when the detective asked if her husband was capable of murder, she thought for a long time and then answered no. The evidence against Colin was not enough to send him to prison, which angered Robert and Mary Smith. Later, Colin was called in again for questioning. This time, Colin claimed that he had an alibi to counter the charges against him. He said that at 6:30 a.m. on August 25th, he went to a hardware store and bought household cleaning chemicals and trash bags. The store's cameras confirmed this, but the purchase of large trash bags raised suspicions. In addition, Colin received a text message from Cassandra, saying that Cassandra was coming to his house. Colin immediately deleted the message, but it was still stored in the mobile carrier's memory. The police took it from calls and text messages. According to cell phone signals, Colin and Cassandra had not left the house for several hours that morning. Colin turned off his phone but left Cassandra's phone on, possibly accidentally. As a result, police were able to track his movements, including where he was seen on the station's CCTV cameras. Police suspect Colin may have used the cafe to clean up after the murder and wash up in the toilet. Colin drove to where he had discarded Cassandra's phone, which was the last location of Cassandra's cell phone signal. The police need to find Cassandra's body and seize the GPS tracking device on Colin's car to accurately track his route. This device provided new evidence in the case. Following Colin's trail the previous day, the police discovered a large trash can tied with a rope in a ravine in the forest. The ground around the bag was covered in blood, and it was clear to see what was inside. The case happened a month ago, so identifying the body was difficult. However, police were able to identify Cassandra's body thanks to a tattoo described in the search notes. Colin was arrested the same day and charged with murder. Forensic examination revealed that Cassandra's death was caused by a fractured skull due to blunt force trauma. During the trial, the police presented Colin Dudley's motive for committing the crime. However, due to a lack of witnesses and physical evidence, including the murder weapon, it was impossible to convince the jury that Colin was guilty. To resolve the case, the court offered Colin a plea deal stating that if he pleaded guilty, he would receive a reduced sentence. Colin accepted the deal and was sentenced to 26 years in prison. Cassandra's mother and brother were deeply saddened by the outcome, as they still grappled with feelings of guilt for not having met Cassandra before her death. They are especially worried about the fact that Colin may one day be released from prison, free to live the rest of his life regardless of the crimes he has committed against their family. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Kelly Cochran. Christopher Reagan was born and raised in Detroit, Michigan, where he spent his early years. At the age of 20, he decided to serve his country and joined the military. Christopher committed himself to protecting the peace and safety of his fellow citizens. Christopher was stationed at a military base near Marquette, where he met Terry O'Donnell, a young teacher from Iron River. They lived in the same area and would often see each other around town as they spent more time together. They remained close friends for many years, but Christopher eventually decided to leave the military and move to Traverse City. Despite the distance between them, they continued to communicate regularly, and in December 2012, Christopher asked Terry to take their relationship to the next level. Terry and Christopher have known each other for many years. They find they have a lot in common. They decide to live together. Terry and Christopher choose Iron River as the perfect place for them to settle down. Christopher finds a job at a factory that makes parts for military ships, where he becomes a supervisor. However, after 2 years of living together, problems began to arise in their relationship. Unfortunately, they didn't make an effort to work through their issues, and it became clear that their relationship was coming to an end. Eventually, they made the difficult decision to go their separate ways. Despite the breakup, they were able to part on good terms and remain friends. After breaking up with Terry, Christopher realized that he couldn't live in her house anymore, so he decided to rent his own house. He felt that the town he lived in was too small, and he wanted a more dynamic city. Christopher began applying for jobs in various locations, sending out his resume in search of a new job. In October 2014, Christopher found a job in Asheville, North Carolina. As Christopher settled into his new life in Asheville, he contacted Terry on October 14th, telling her that he would be taking the day off tomorrow and looking forward to meeting Terry for a walk. However, on October 15th, Christopher did not contact Terry as planned. Terry became worried and tried calling him for several days, but he did not answer. She even contacted their mutual friends. 10 days after Christopher went missing, Terry filed a police report. The police accepted the report and told Terry that Christopher had probably moved to a new job in North Carolina and that he had started a new life and wanted to contact old friends. To avoid speculation, investigators conducted a thorough investigation. They identified Christopher's new workplace and contacted an employee to gather information. However, surprisingly, they found out that Christopher had not shown up to work in 10 days. The police then suspected that he might have been involved in an accident, given his frequent solo outdoor trips. The search for Christopher led investigators to the local woods, where he was known to frequent. Trained search dogs were brought in to aid in the effort. But no signs of Christopher were found. Terry, concerned that Christopher may have been injured or in an accident, suggested searching his former apartment. The investigators agreed and visited the apartment, where they were met with a scene of disarray. Clothes and belongings were scattered across the floor, and closets were left open. Initially, they thought that Christopher might have simply been messy, but Terry disputed this, stating that Christopher was typically neat and organized. The detectives started to suspect a connection between the recent events and the crime. After investigating Christopher's home, they decided to expand their search. A thorough search of the neighborhood led them to find Christopher's car 8 miles outside Iron River, near the city limits. The police found it unusual that the car was left there, suggesting it might have been abandoned unintentionally. After forcing open a door, they searched the interior and found nothing suspicious, only ordinary clothing. However, one of the officers noticed a small yellow piece of paper on the front passenger seat with a detailed route written on it. They decided to follow the route to see where it led. Although the paper did not specify an exact address, the directions were clear. According to Terry, Christopher, although familiar with the city of Iron River, did not know the local street names, so he wrote down the directions using landmarks such as bus stops and gas stations. Terry deduced from the detailed notes that this was Christopher's first time visiting the location. The detectives followed the route outlined on the paper, which led them to a nearby town and a specific house mentioned in Christopher's notes. When they arrived, they knocked on the door to gather information in Christopher's connection to the location. A man named Jason Cochran answered the door, and his wife Kelly was there. The police explained that they were investigating Christopher's disappearance and had found a lead pointing to this address. Terry, who worked with Christopher at the same factory, revealed that they were coworkers. She had tried to contact Christopher via text message in mid-October but had not received a response. Investigators found a note in Christopher's car that showed the route to Jason's house. Although confused, Jason and Kelly agreed to cooperate with the investigation. After a short interrogation without any further clues, the detectives left Jason Cochran's house. Detectives then interviewed Christopher's coworkers at the factory. A supervisor shared that Christopher had been having an affair with Kelly Cochran, which was an open secret among employees. This revelation sparked interest, leading investigators to re-question the Jason and Kelly. During re-interrogation, Kelly confessed to her relationship with Christopher. However, she claimed that she could not reveal this information earlier because her husband Jason was present. According to Kelly, Jason agreed to her affair. However, Christopher's colleagues disputed Kelly's story. They claimed that Jason did not approve of Kelly's affair. When Jason was later brought in for questioning, he completely denied approving of Kelly's affair. His strong objection to Kelly's infidelity aroused suspicion and made him a suspect. The investigation into Christopher's disappearance was ongoing, but the lack of concrete evidence made it impossible to determine whether Kelly was involved. As a result, Kelly and Jason were released from the police station. The case remained unsolved for 5 months. In March 2015, a new investigator, Detective Jeremy Ogden from the Hobart Police Department, took over the case. Jeremy Ogden began by thoroughly examining the Jason Cochran family's background. Kelly and Jason had met in high school and started living together soon after graduation. They had distinct personalities. Kelly was outgoing, sociable, and talkative, while Jason was quiet and reserved. He rarely initiated conversations, only responding to questions asked of him. Despite their differences, they decided to get married. After the wedding, they started a business together, providing swimming pool maintenance services. The business was modest, but it provided a decent income for they. Jason handled most of the pool maintenance work, but the constant stress and physical strain took a toll on his health. He began to experience back problems and felt increasingly heavier every day. Eventually, he realized he could no longer continue running the business. Kelly then took over the responsibilities of running the business, hoping that Jason would soon recover and return to his duties. However, his condition continued to worsen, and medical treatments were not providing the desired relief. Kelly searched for alternative ways to help her husband recover. During her search, Kelly discovered a plant that offered hope for Jason's recovery. However, the plant was banned in their home state, making it inaccessible to them. To access the treatment, Kelly and Jason decided to relocate to Michigan, specifically Iron River Township, in 2014. Jason consulted his doctor and received a prescription for pain medication. Around the same time, in early 2014, Jason's wife, Kelly Cochran, started working at a factory that manufactured parts for U.S. warships. Kelly and Jason moved to the area. Kelly and Jason worked at the same factory where Christopher Reagan worked. Christopher and Kelly found common topics of conversation and over time became close friends. This friendship was especially important to Christopher. After gathering evidence, prosecutors presented their case to a Michigan judge to obtain a search warrant for Kelly and Jason's home. The judge granted the warrant, and on March 6, a team of investigators searched Kelly and Jason's home, carefully searching for any evidence related to Christopher's disappearance. The only significant discovery was a book written by Jason. He used a pseudonym in the world of video games. The title of the work was ordinary, but its content was horrifying. In this dark and violent book, Jason described the murder of the person who had harmed him. After reading the book, the detectives noticed a character who bore an uncanny resemblance to Christopher. This raised suspicions about Jason, leading them to wonder if he had been inspired by the real-life crimes he had committed. 3 weeks later, a second search of Jason's home was conducted. The police hoped to find crucial evidence that had been missed in the first search. However, when they arrived at Jason's home, they found it empty, with no cars in sight. Repeated attempts to knock on the door went unanswered. It was later discovered that Kelly and Jason had fled the state shortly after the initial search, moving to Indiana. Their sudden departure left investigators concerned. Michigan police, needing a DNA sample, asked Indiana police for help. Indiana police went to Jason's new home, where they had just moved. The investigation into Christopher Reagan's disappearance ran out of clues. Time passed, and on February 22, 2016, Hobart, Indiana, police received a frantic call from Kelly Cochran, who tried to explain that her husband, Jason, was not breathing. When paramedics arrived, Kelly was in a panic. It was clear that Jason was beyond saving. He was sitting in a chair, his face burning like fire, as if he had overheated. The doctors officially confirmed Jason's death. His body was then sent for a thorough forensic examination. Meanwhile, Kelly was handed over to a police patrol and taken to relatives who lived nearby. To piece together what happened, investigators thoroughly searched Jason's new home. During the search, a police officer found a syringe at the foot of Jason in his wife's bed. Initially, investigators believed Jason's death was due to substance abuse. The medical examiner's report showed that Jason had multiple drugs in his system, but Jason's death was due to strangulation, confirmed by bruises on his neck and face. The focus of the investigation then shifted to Kelly Cochran, who appeared to be connected to both crimes. She was now considered the prime suspect in not only Christopher's disappearance but also her husband's murder. On February 23, 2016, Kelly Cochran was summoned to the police station to answer questions about her husband's death. Under direct questioning and pressure from investigators, Kelly denied any involvement in her husband's death and Christopher's disappearance. She claimed that Jason's death was due to a drug overdose. Months later, investigators still lacked concrete evidence to convict Kelly. During the investigation, Detective Jeremy Ogden met Walter Hammerman, a close friend of Jason's. Kelly informed Walter of Jason's death, who then contacted the police. Walter shared his insights with investigators, saying he did not believe Jason's death was caused by drugs. He claimed that Jason had used herbs to relieve his chronic back pain. In March of the previous year, Jason confided in Walter about his concerns. Jason and Kelly were asked to go to Indiana because the Iron River police suspected them of being involved in Christopher's disappearance. This had a significant impact on Jason, leading to depression. Walter observed a notable change in Jason's behavior, with Kelly increasingly taking control over his life. Jason appeared to be constantly anxious, and he began to avoid social gatherings as soon as Kelly returned from work. As the investigation progressed, this information became a vital link. After the medical examiner determined that Jason had died from strangulation, Detective Ogden devised a plan to pressure Kelly into revealing the truth about Jason's death. Walter, Jason's friend, was used as bait to lure Kelly into a trap. On March 12, 2016, Walter, under police surveillance and equipped with a listening device, called Kelly. He told her that Jason had given him a letter containing important information before his death, with the condition that it be sent to the police if anything happened to him. However, Kelly surprisingly asked Walter to drop the idea, which caught both Walter and the police off guard. Despite this development, the detectives still lacked direct evidence to build a case. In the weeks following her initial questioning, Kelly was subjected to multiple interrogations by investigators trying to uncover the truth. Despite their efforts, she continued to deny any wrongdoing. However, on April 26, 2016, it became apparent that Kelly Cochran had evaded the scrutiny of investigators and was on the loose. Detectives joined forces with police officers from Iron River and Hobart to launch a federal manhunt for Kelly Cochran. Walter Hammerman, who had cooperated with the police, was shocked and frightened by the news. He feared that Kelly might never be caught and could potentially harm him again. As the search for Kelly intensified, her phone went off, leading investigators to believe she was deliberately concealing her location. Kelly evaded police and fled to Wingo, Kentucky, over 6 hours away from Hobart. A detective notified the local authorities to exercise extreme caution if they found Kelly. Police in Wingo identified Kelly at her cousin's house on April 28. Understanding that she posed a potential danger and was prone to attempting to escape, officers rapidly proceeded to the residence, avoiding advance warnings that afternoon and detaining Kelly on site. During the interview, Kelly revealed new details. That Kelly was deeply in love with Jason and wanted to leave the city life behind to start over with him. On October 13, 2015, Jason discovered Kelly's infidelity. Jason made a dark pact. The adulterer was obliged to kill his lover if the affair was exposed. Kelly claimed she had never taken this pact seriously, thinking it was just a joke. However, Jason was resolute and warned Kelly that if she didn't fulfill her end of the bargain, he would take matters into his own hands. Despite her reservations, Kelly reluctantly helped Jason commit a heinous crime. The next evening, October 14, 2015, Christopher arrived at Kelly's house, eager to spend a romantic evening with Christopher while her husband was away. Kelly had planned a fun evening, complete with dinner and intimacy. Kelly and Christopher had dinner together and then went upstairs to the house. Then Jason suddenly appeared. Jason rushed into the bedroom, holding a rifle. Christopher immediately realized that he was in danger. Without hesitation, Jason shot Christopher in the head, killing him. Jason and Kelly then dragged the body down to the basement, where they began to dismember it with a hacksaw. Jason and Kelly cut Christopher's limbs and head off his body and placed the remains in several garbage bags. They then dumped the bags in the woods near Crystal Falls. To avoid suspicion, they drove Christopher's car away from the house. Kelly and Jason thoroughly cleaned the house to remove any evidence of the crime. Kelly was consumed by a deep-seated anger towards her husband, whom she blamed for ruining her chance at happiness with he she truly loved, Christopher. She couldn't forgive her husband for depriving her of the opportunity to be with him, and the pain and loss she felt lingered every day. Kelly's resentment towards her husband eventually turned to hatred, and she knew she could no longer live peacefully with him. An opportunity for revenge presented itself on February 22, 2016, when her husband complained of back pain. Kelly convinced him to let her give her an injection, but she deliberately gave him a dose that killed him. However, the medication didn't work as planned, and her husband was still breathing. Kelly then suffocated him by covering his mouth and nose with her hands. To ensure he was dead, she also squeezed his neck, which explained the bruises found on his body. After confessing to the crime, Kelly cooperated with the police to help them locate Christopher's remains. On May 18, 2016, Detective Jeremy Ogden led a team to a remote area near Crystal Falls to search for Christopher's body. A canine unit picked up the scent and led the team to a small hill, where they found a human skull with bullet holes, indicating a homicide. The team believed they had discovered Christopher's remains. Further examination of the scene yielded additional evidence, including a .22 caliber bullet, a broken firearm. Dental records later confirmed the victim's identity. This breakthrough finally solved the case that had haunted investigators for 2 years. Kelly Cochran was formally charged with the murders of Christopher and Jason Cochran in April 2016. On February 13, 2017, Kelly was brought to court in Michigan to face charges. The prosecutor argued that Kelly was the mastermind behind the crime and that she had planned and executed. The prosecution presented strong evidence, including Kelly's own confession, to support their case. However, Kelly told a different story. She claimed that her husband, Jason, was the one who had planned and committed the crime. According to Kelly, Jason was jealous and had been abusing her. On the day of the crime, Jason allegedly hid in the basement and surprised Kelly and Christopher, then shot Christopher in a fit of rage. Kelly also claimed that Jason had forced her to help him dismember the body by threatening to harm her. Despite Kelly's new version of events, the jury found her guilty of premeditated murder after deliberating for 3 hours. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. After being sentenced, Kelly Cochran was sent directly to Crown Point Correctional Facility in Ionia, Michigan, where she is currently serving her sentence. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Sheil Kovlin. Sheil Kovlin grew up on the west side of Manhattan. Shelley's life was marked by a love of learning and academic excellence, earning a degree in wealth management. This degree opened the door to a successful career in Swiss banking. Sheil's career flourished, and she became skilled at managing multi-million-dollar portfolios for her clients. However, despite her professional success and financial security, Sheil felt unfulfilled. She longed to start a family of her own and become a mother. In an effort to change her circumstances, Sheil attended a Jewish singles event in February 1998, where she met a 26-year-old man named Rod Kovlin, who also worked in the banking sector. Sheil and Rod were a young couple with many similar interests and ambitions. Their relationship developed quickly despite their significant age difference. They spent all their time together and then decided to get married, feeling that everything was just right. Some people thought they were rushing into marriage, but for Sheil and Rod, it was perfect. They had 2 beautiful children, a boy and a girl, and their family was complete. However, their happy life was shattered on New Year's Eve 2009 when Sheil died in a tragic accident. At first, the police thought it was just a freak accident. On December 30, 2009, 2 police officers were finishing their night shift at a Manhattan police station. They received an emergency call from Rod Kovlin, Sheil's husband, who had called in a panic to report that he had found Sheil in her bathtub, submerged in blood, and that she was dead. He followed the police's instructions to pull her out of the water and attempt to resuscitate her. However, it soon became clear that his efforts to save her life would not be successful. As Sheil's body was cold and motionless, Rod Kovlin covered her with a blanket and waited for the police to arrive. Police quickly arrived and investigated the scene. Upon arrival, they assessed the situation and blocked off a downtown Manhattan street. Initially, officers suspected that Sheil's death may have been a suicide. Inside the apartment, the police found scattered children's toys. Proceeding to the bathroom, they discovered the Sheil wrapped in a blanket by her husband. The bloody water in the tub and the wet floor indicated that Rod Kovlin had recently pulled the body from the water. A bleeding wound on the back of Sheil's head was visible. Police found a torn hinge on the cabinet in the bathroom where Sheil died, suggesting she fell after losing her grip on the doorknob. Experts concluded there was no forced entry after checking around the house. The detective working the case decided to talk to the family members. During the interview, it was discovered that Sheil and Rod Kovlin's 9-year-old daughter was the first to discover her mother's body. Traumatized and shocked by what she saw, she told the police what had happened. It turned out that the night before, she and her younger brother had slept in their mother's bed. Waking up in the middle of the night and realizing that her mother was not there, she went looking for her and stumbled upon the horrifying scene in the bathroom. She quickly called her father, Rod Kovlin, who had recently separated from his mother and was downstairs. He rushed into the bathroom, pulled his wife's body out of the water, and called emergency services. Her account of the events matched Rod Kovlin's, supporting the theory that her death was an accident. The police informed Sheil's family of the tragic event, leaving everyone in shock. An autopsy and forensic examination were scheduled for the following day. When the medical examiner contacted investigators to begin the examination, he was surprised to learn that this procedure would not take place, despite being necessary. This left the examiner confused. It was later discovered that a rabbi from Sheil's synagogue had intervened. The rabbi contacted an organization responsible for burying Orthodox Jews, who then asked the police for permission to enter the scene in accordance with the family's religious rites. The police granted permission and a team of rabbis arrived at the scene. They cleaned up the blood in the bathtub and prepared Sheil's body for burial, in accordance with the family's beliefs. Unfortunately, this process destroyed all evidence and clues before they could be examined by the police forensic department. Orthodox Jewish tradition considers autopsies unacceptable because they involve defiling the body of the deceased. The rabbi quickly stepped in to support Sheil's grieving family, who were grateful for the rabbi's help. As a result, the family agreed to forego an autopsy and organize funeral arrangements. Sheil was buried within 24 hours, with hundreds of people attending to pay their respects. Sheil's parents questioned the cause of Sheil's death. Police told them that potential evidence had been destroyed during the cleanup. They thought that a fall in the bathtub would certainly have caused the accident. But the possibility of death from such an accident seemed unlikely. The family hired a private investigator to investigate the circumstances of her death and determine whether it was indeed an accident. The private investigator begins by going to the family home to talk to Sheil's relatives, and learns that Sheil's marriage to Rod Kovlin is having major problems. Their marriage began to fall apart after their 10th wedding anniversary in 2008. Rod Kovlin frequently changed jobs and developed a gambling addiction, spending a lot of money on gambling. Sheil felt neglected because Rod Kovlin spent a lot of time playing video games. Sheil was also frustrated by the amount of money Rod Kovlin's family spent on his frequent trips, and he was unfaithful to her. Sheil, after discovering his email cheating, she decided to end their marriage and began the process of getting a religious divorce. However, the formal divorce process will take some time to complete. Although they are separated and experiencing strain in their relationship, they has tried to maintain their relationship for the sake of their children. Despite this effort, conflicts and disagreements between Sheil and Rod Kovlin continued to arise. Sheil had recently confided in her loved ones about her grievances with Rod Kovlin, characterizing him as aggressive and hot-tempered. She felt uneasy and monitored. The private detective suspected that Rod Kovlin might have been involved in his wife Sheil's death due to the complexities in their marital life. To investigate further, the detective aimed to determine if a crime had occurred at the scene where Sheil's body was found. He planned to inspect her apartment, but the door was sealed, requiring him to obtain a court order to gain access. Upon arriving at the scene with New York police officers, the detective attempted to unlock the door with a provided key, but it wouldn't budge. Just then, Rod Kovlin appeared from his apartment, claiming he had heard a noise and came to investigate. When questioned by the police and the detective, Rod Kovlin took the key and easily opened the door. This raised suspicions. Had Rod Kovlin genuinely heard a noise, or was he deliberately keeping an eye on the situation? The detective searched the apartment for evidence of murder. Sheil's family said she was home on December 31st, but her phone was missing. A phone charger was found, but not the phone that he paid particular attention to the hinges, which investigators believed she had ripped off during a fall. The more he examined them, the more he suspected that, with Sheil's strength, ripping off hinges that were firmly attached to the cabinet was impossible. The detective discussed his findings with the police, trying to convince them that Sheil's death was not an accident, but a murder. However, the police remained unconvinced, citing a lack of evidence. Therefore, they decided to perform an autopsy to conclusively determine the cause of death. This decision caused a difficult debate with Shiel's family. The exhumation took place 2 weeks after Shiel had been buried. Her loved ones were deeply distressed by the decision. In the Jewish faith, exhumation is considered negative and many religious leaders oppose the practice. The family needed time to think about their next steps. They felt the need to find out the truth about their daughter's death, so they agreed to exhume her body. However, the exhumation process was difficult, so the family had to apply for a special order from the prosecutor's office. Even with the family's consent, they still had to make sure that all the necessary paperwork was completed. Once all the paperwork was completed, they proceeded with the exhumation and autopsy. The autopsy results showed that Shiel did not die from a fall, but from strangulation, which caused her to suffocate and break her neck. The official cause of Shiel's death was revised, and it was no longer considered an accident. Instead, it was officially ruled a murder. The detective's suspicions and efforts were vindicated. The autopsy results were instrumental in prompting the New York Police Department to reopen the investigation into Shiel's death. Detectives began scrutinizing new evidence, including phone records and bank statements. They also interviewed everyone who had interacted with Rod Coughlin and Shiel. The attorney shared information about Rod Coughlin and Shiel during the first divorce hearing in May 2009. Rod Coughlin claimed that he could not afford the money because he was unemployed, but the judge said that he had to give up gambling and electronics. In court, Rod Coughlin's true nature was exposed, and he continued to criticize Shiel, making false accusations about her lifestyle, finances, and behavior toward their son. He even called Shiel's workplace to defame her. In the subsequent divorce hearing on July 7, 2009, the court banned Rod Coughlin from spending time alone with the children, a ban that remained in place even after Shiel's death. The court also denied Rod Coughlin custody of the children and awarded custody to Rod Coughlin's parents through a social worker. This decision likely angered Rod Coughlin greatly. Police interviewed a former caregiver who had cared for Rod Coughlin's children before he fired her. It was discovered that on December 30th, Shiel had received an expensive keratin hair treatment that cost hundreds of dollars. The care instructions emphasized avoiding humidity in high temperatures for several days, essentially prohibiting baths or showers. Shiel's autopsy revealed no signs of bathing on the day of her death, leading investigators to speculate that she may not have taken a bath. Detectives reviewed surveillance footage from the building, which showed Rod Coughlin leaving his apartment at 4 a.m. on the day of the murder, dressed to go out. He returned a short time later. The building's security guard found this unusual, as Rod had never left the building that early. The security guard asked Rod Coughlin if he needed anything, but when he said no, Rod Coughlin returned with the chocolate bars and gave them to the security guard. Investigators believe that Rod Coughlin's actions were intentional to create an alibi, and as a result, he became the prime suspect. Shiel and Rod Coughlin were still married, which meant that absent a will or divorce, Rod Coughlin would inherit her estate, which was worth over $5 million. Additionally, on December 31, 2009, Shiel scheduled a meeting with her attorney to update her will and remove Rod Coughlin from the list of beneficiaries, which posed a significant threat to Rod Coughlin's rights and provided a clear motive for the crime. All of Shiel's assets were frozen in a safe deposit account. It is likely that Rod Coughlin knew about Shiel's plans to remove his name from her will, as he may have been monitoring her activities. A review of the surveillance footage revealed that Shiel had returned home at 8 p.m. the night before the crime, talking on her phone. However, the phone had gone missing after the crime. The investigators decided to conduct another search of the crime scene, and upon returning to the apartment, they quickly found Shiel's mobile phone lying on her bedside table, still connected to the charger. When questioned by the police, Rod Coughlin hired a lawyer. Ed, who advised him to remain silent. As a result, investigators had to continue searching for new evidence implicating Rod Coughlin. When they examined Rod Coughlin's phone records, they discovered frequent calls to the number of Deborah Holmes, a married woman with 3 children. 5 months before Shields' murder, Rod Coughlin and Deborah met at a sick bow tournament and began a passionate affair. They often met at sick bow tournaments or played together online. Investigators saw an opportunity to gather information and decided to contact Deborah with a few questions. However, to their surprise, Deborah responded that her attorney had asked her not to cooperate. Faced with Deborah's refusal to speak, the police asked for the name of her attorney. The response revealed that Deborah and Rod Coughlin were the same attorney. As a last resort, the police searched Shields' newly discovered phone for incriminating text messages or electronic communications between Rod and Deborah. All data had been completely erased by a professional. Even skilled programmers were unable to recover the deleted messages. Over time, it became clear that he had succeeded in evading justice. While his crimes may have been well executed, the rabbi's meticulous cleaning of the bathroom was a major factor in hampering the investigation. By removing all traces of blood and other evidence, they destroyed DNA, making it increasingly difficult for investigators to collect evidence. The case stalled because Rod Coughlin confessed to the crime, and a lack of evidence prevented the case from going to trial. 5 years have passed since the investigation into Shields' death began, but no arrests have been made. Police have searched for clues and evidence of Rod Coughlin's involvement in Shields' death for years, but to no avail. However, the case took a turn when Rod Coughlin's mistress, Deborah, came forward. She contacted the police, and they invited her to the station for questioning. Deborah had recently broken up with Rod Coughlin, which prompted her to contact the police. She shared information with the police that Rod Coughlin had conspired to gain custody of the children, but because he was a suspect in Shields' death and did not have custody of the children, he could not access the money Shields left behind. Rod Coughlin hatched a sinister plan to get his hands on Shields' fortune. Rod Coughlin planned to manipulate his 15-year-old daughter into falsely accusing her grandfather, Rod Coughlin's father, of assaulting her. This would result in the grandfather being imprisoned and losing custody of his granddaughter, and Rod Coughlin would give his daughter a large sum of money upon completion of the mission. Meanwhile, Rod Coughlin had been secretly withdrawing funds from the only account he had access to, which was meant for his children's education. His parents discovered that he was misusing the money and were extremely unhappy with his lack of concern for his children's well-being. This led to a heated dispute between Rod Coughlin and his parents. Rod Coughlin's anger towards his parents escalated to the point where he considered harming them. In 2012, he confided in his lover, Deborah, about his plan to have his daughter poison his parents' tea with rat poison. He believed that since his daughter was a minor, she would receive a lighter sentence if caught. Following this, Rod Coughlin came up with several other schemes. He considered burning down his parents' house and trapping them inside by jamming the doors. Rod Coughlin also thought about arranging a fake marriage for his daughter to a Mexican man, which would have forced her to give up part of her inheritance to him. The police were shocked by the details of Rod Coughlin's plans. Deborah secretly collected evidence, storing a large amount of data on hard drives. Deborah realized she was dealing with a psychopath, and she waited until after she broke up with Rod Coughlin to share the evidence with the police. The recordings she collected of Rod Coughlin's conversations with various people. The police now had to listen carefully to these recordings to find conclusive evidence. Deborah's contribution to the investigation was crucial. As the investigators analyzed the recordings, they made a surprising discovery. In a conversation with a friend he met through backgammon, Rod Coughlin casually mentioned that he had keys to Shields' apartment and could enter it at any time. Investigators found that Rod Coughlin was plotting against his own daughter, planning to pin the responsibility for the Shields' demise on her. Thanks to all the information gathered, the police finally had compelling evidence to charge Rod Coughlin with the demise of his wife. On November 1, 2015, Rod Coughlin was arrested. Shiel's family awaited the trial of their daughter's perpetrator, but victory was not assured. Rod Coughlin, while incarcerated, shared intimate details of his wife's murder with a fellow inmate. He even reenacted the strangulation, which matched the autopsy results. During the 7-week trial, the jury heard testimony about the heinous crimes he planned to commit, including murdering his wife, targeting his parents, and framing his own children. The jury was horrified by his cold-blooded nature. In March 2019, the court convicted Rod Coughlin of murdering his wife, Shiel. Although there was no direct eyewitness, the overwhelming evidence led to a life imprisonment sentence. With the possibility of parole after 25 years, Rod Coughlin will no longer pose a threat to his family or the people of New York. Hi there, investigators. It's time to uncover the truth behind another case, the case of Austin Harrouff. Austin Malcolm Harrouff, known by the nickname Golden Boy, was born on December 21, 1996, in Palm Beach, Florida. He was the eldest of 2 children, and was born into a wealthy and respected medical family. His father was a successful dentist with many private clinics, and his mother was a leading pharmaceutical expert. The Harrouff family lived in a spacious, luxurious house by the sea. When Austin was 1.5 years old, his younger sister Haley was born, and the 2 siblings quickly became close. Austin's parents ensured that he and his younger sister received a good education and encouraged personal growth and creative pursuits. Austin excelled at school and had many interests outside of studying. He was passionate about playing guitar, wrestling, football, and acting in an amateur theater group. He saw himself as a creative and ambitious person. Along with his parents and sister, Austin traveled extensively, discovering new places during their vacations. Austin described himself as a cheerful and optimistic person with a strong imagination who excelled in academics and sports through perseverance. However, Austin also admitted that he was very shy, which sometimes made it difficult for him to communicate with his peers. Austin's personal life was interrupted at the age of 13 when his parents decided to divorce. His father moved out of the family home and into a new home with his new partner, eventually marrying her. Meanwhile, Austin remained with his mother, who also found a new partner and married him within a year. Despite facing the emotional challenges of his parents' divorce, Austin continued to excel academically and athletically. Austin always dreamed of becoming a doctor, like his parents, to help others. He was a high-achieving student and was admired by many of his friends. Austin's physical transformation during his youth was remarkable. He grew to be 6 feet 2 inches tall, developed outstanding muscles, and became strong. Austin's charismatic smile and gentle demeanor gave him an almost angelic appearance. However, he still struggled with social anxiety and shyness, which limited his ability to form relationships. In his personal diary, Austin wrote candidly about feeling isolated at school. His classmates called him a nerd and made fun of him, leaving Austin with few friends. Despite these difficulties, he still held out hope that his life would improve once he entered college. Austin looked forward to starting over, forging new relationships, and gaining independence from his parents. The important turning point came when Austin received news that he had been accepted into the University of Florida's prestigious 4-year medical program. This achievement promised to open the door to a successful and rewarding medical career, with the opportunity to continue his studies at any of the top medical schools in the country. Overjoyed by this news, Austin felt like his dream was finally within reach. As he prepared to enter this new chapter, his parents drove him to the college campus in late August. With excitement mixed with trepidation, Austin began his journey to becoming an independent adult, documenting his experiences in his first blog. During his freshman year, Austin became deeply interested in bodybuilding and spent a significant amount of time in the gym, achieving notable results. He had developed strong muscles, but his success was partly due to steroid use. Austin had openly discussed steroid use in a YouTube vlog he had started in the spring of 2016. Austin had posted various videos to his channel, including discussions about sports and fitness, musical performances with his guitar, and philosophical musings on life. However, over time, his posts became increasingly disturbing. Austin began warning his followers about the dangers of steroids, claiming that they could cause serious mental health consequences and drive a person crazy. Austin had two distinct physical states, a normal state and a state he called crazy. Austin found it difficult to understand these contrasting aspects of himself. Austin had created videos where he spoke in different voices, as if he were other people. Sometimes, Austin's voice changed and he burst into tears for no apparent reason. Experts then reviewed Austin's posts and concluded that Austin was desperately seeking help in each post. As Austin struggled to connect with others during his studies, his blog had become his primary means of expressing himself. Over time, videos recorded him gradually becoming insane. His behavior became increasingly erratic, provocative, and aggressive. Some subscribers suspected he was using banned substances while recording, and they asked him about it in the comment section. Austin denied this, saying it was unhealthy and that he would never use banned substances. However, his behavior showed otherwise. One subscriber even speculated that Austin might have dissociative identity disorder. The sudden changes in Austin were not only manifested in behavior but also in appearance. When he returned home for summer vacation, his mother and sister were shocked by the changes they witnessed. During his year-long separation, Austin had experienced significant physical changes, including significant muscle gain, but these changes were more than superficial. Austin's behavior became increasingly strange. He would say nonsense and claim he didn't need sleep. At first, his family did not take this seriously, but as night fell, they realized he was serious. Austin declared that he would guard the house and protect his family from unknown threats, and he kept his promise, wandering the hallways until morning. Every hour, he loudly checked on his mother and sister, reassuring them that they could sleep peacefully because he was guarding them. The next morning, his mother made him talk seriously and asked him if he had used drugs. Austin admitted that he had tried many different stimulants over the past year and described their effects on him. He even used a powerful synthetic drug that caused hallucinations, rage, and could be fatal if overdosed. However, he promised his mother that he had stopped using and was no longer in danger. Despite her concerns, Austin's mother did not seek help from professionals. As a pharmacist, she thought she could help her son herself. She gave him sedatives and sleeping pills to help him relax and sleep after a long, restless night. However, Austin only slept for a few hours before resuming his vigil, informing his family every hour that everything was quiet and under control. Over several weeks, Austin's behavior continued to deteriorate, but his mother refused to seek professional help from psychiatrists and did not even inform his father about the situation. On the morning of August 13th, Austin unexpectedly visited an old classmate who lived nearby. The classmate was stunned because they hadn't seen each other in over a year and Austin hadn't contacted her. When she asked why he came, Austin explained that he had forgotten the year of his birth and was looking for answers. The confused classmate replied that it was 1996, after which Austin abruptly turned around and left without saying anything. Austin's behavior scared and puzzled the girl, so she immediately called Austin's mother and told her everything, asking if the boy might be using drugs. This prompted the woman to call her ex-husband, who was working in another state, and express her concern that something was seriously wrong with their son. Austin's father flew to Florida the next day and, after speaking with his son, suggested he voluntarily check into a clinic for a medical examination, which Austin firmly refused. Austin's father then had a heartfelt conversation with his ex-wife, and together they decided to send Austin for a mandatory examination and subsequent treatment at a drug rehabilitation or psychiatric facility. However, they couldn't do it in time. A troubling revelation followed. The next day, Austin's friends invited him to join them at the beach because of the hot and sunny weather. His mother insisted that Haley accompany him to keep an eye on her brother. Austin was excited about the outing but dressed as if he were going to the mountains instead of the beach. He wore a thick athletic hoodie, long pants, boots, and ski goggles. When his friends saw him, they were silent at first, then burst into laughter. They teased him about his outfit and asked if he was okay. Austin became angry and shouted that if they thought he was crazy, he would prove it by threatening their lives. Austin's friend didn't take him seriously but stepped back just in case. Haley noticed Austin was on the edge of a breakdown and decided to talk to him to calm him down. In a private conversation, Austin confided to Harley that he believed he was half wild animal, immortal, and had superhuman strength. This frightened her, but she stayed calm to avoid provoking him. At the beach, Austin behaved normally. He joked, laughed, played volleyball, and had fun with his friends. As evening came, they all said goodbye and went their separate ways. Austin and Haley walked to a small restaurant near the coast to meet their father and his current wife. On the way, Austin told Haley he wanted to test his immortality by crossing a busy highway directly through the fast-moving traffic. When Haley realized what was happening, she chased after Austin and physically pulled him away, urging him to hurry because they were expected. Austin agreed that they shouldn't keep anyone waiting and quietly followed his sister. During dinner, Austin acted strangely again, getting up from the table several times to go outside, looking around as if he was afraid of someone, then returning. He then decided to tell his father and stepmother about his belief in his immortality. When his father calmly suggested seeking professional help, Austin leaped up, shouted that he wasn't insane, pushed his father forcefully, and ran out of the restaurant. After leaving the restaurant, Austin walked several miles and eventually wandered into a neighborhood he didn't recognize. There, an open garage with bright lights caught his attention, and he headed towards it. This home belonged to an elderly couple, 59-year-old John Stevens and 56-year-old Michelle Mishkin Stevens. In the evenings, they loved barbecuing and watching movies in their spacious garage, which they had set up like a living room. Married for over 25 years, they had 3 adult children who lived independently, allowing them to enjoy retirement and each other's company. That evening, John took their dog for a walk while Michelle prepared for their usual movie night. When Michelle noticed an unfamiliar young man on their lawn, she felt no threat and even asked if he needed help. However, the situation unexpectedly took a turn. Jeffery Trevino, the Stevens family neighbor who lived across the street, was on friendly terms with them. Around 9 p.m., he heard suspicious noises outside. When he looked into the yard, he suddenly heard Michelle's agonizing scream. Without hesitation, he rushed to help his neighbors and saw Austin near the garage. Jeffery tried to pull Austin away, but Austin was overpoweringly strong and knocked Jeffery to the ground. As Jeffery tried to recover, Austin stabbed him several times in the back and shoulder. Realizing he was overpowered and needed help, Jeffery ran into the Stevens family house to draw Austin's attention away from himself. After exiting through the back door, Jeffery headed to his own home. Once inside, Jeffery realized Austin had not followed him but had returned to attack Michelle. Jeffery immediately called the police and emergency medical services, reporting an armed attack by a stranger with a knife and stating that both he and his elderly neighbor had been injured. After contacting emergency services, Jeffery fell silent, listening closely. He eventually realized no one was outside his door. It seemed Austin had remained at Stevens family's house, and now strange animal-like noises, resembling the growls of a wild beast, could be heard along with screams of terror and moans. It took the police about 10 minutes to arrive. But by then, it was tragically too late. The sight that awaited them was horrifying. Two officers approached the garage with weapons drawn, only to be halted in shock at the doorway. There, in a pool of blood, lay the lifeless body of Michelle Stevens. The autopsy later revealed she had suffered multiple blunt force traumas to the head and a stab wound to the chest. A bit further inside, in the dim light, two more individuals were on the ground. John was reaching out, pleading for help with a strained voice. Above him, Austin was seemingly choking him. The officers demanded that Austin release the victim, threatening him with their guns. However, Austin showed no response, and firing was too risky due to the possibility of hitting both people. Instead, one officer drew a taser and warned Austin. Only then did he see that Austin was not just assaulting but actually biting John's face, holding his head and neck firmly. Beneath John spread a vast pool of blood, with a chunk of flesh missing from his left cheek. And his lip, nose, and ear were also mutilated and seemingly chewed off. John was immobilized, barely able to move, silently pleading for help. The officers shocked the attacker with the taser, but he seemed unaffected, continuing to tear at John's face with his teeth. A kick to Austin's face only made him growl loudly and bite into Stevens's cheek again. Reinforcements arrived, including a police dog that was unleashed on the frenzied young man. The dog latched onto Austin's arm, but he seemed to feel no pain, breaking free and injuring himself further. A powerful kick from an officer finally disoriented Austin long enough to handcuff him. At this moment, Austin claimed he felt unwell, possibly having eaten something bad, before losing consciousness and convulsing. Emergency medical teams transported 4 individuals from the scene. Unfortunately, Michelle could not survive, and her husband John passed away on the way to the hospital due to severe blood loss from stab wounds and the trauma from the attack. Jeffrey, who reported the incident, survived, but he experienced permanent minor motor skill impairment in his right hand due to nerve and tendon damage. Austin fell into a coma after mistakenly ingesting a substance from a garage bottle, thinking it was alcohol, which turned out to be a chemical. He suffered severe burns to his esophagus and stomach and spent several days in critical condition, but medical professionals ultimately saved him. Austin, the attacker, spent nearly 2 weeks in a coma. Upon regaining consciousness, he claimed to remember nothing about the events of that day. Gradually, he began to recall having dinner at a restaurant and an argument with his father, after which he walked away. Austin described seeing a ghostly figure that guided him through dark alleys and unfamiliar neighborhoods until he saw a light in the distance. The light came from a lantern near Stephen family's garage, where John was preparing a barbecue and setting out food. When Michelle saw him, she was startled and called for help. Austin admitted to hitting her several times and then pulled out a knife, claiming he would rid her of evil. At that moment, a neighbor named Jeffery Fisher intervened, but Austin, thinking Jeffrey was a demon, attacked him with the knife. After Jeffrey ran to get help, Austin continued to assault the woman until she was lifeless. He then noticed a bottle, mistook it for alcohol, and drank about half of it. Soon after, he heard a dog barking and a man's voice. Austin claimed he couldn't remember what happened next, according to his own statements. Initially, there was speculation that Austin was under the influence of strong drugs, which could explain his aggression and lack of sensitivity to pain. However, hospital tests showed no traces of drugs, medication, or alcohol in his blood. This led to the conclusion that Austin might have experienced a psychotic break, acting without awareness of his actions. Experienced psychiatrists were tasked with determining the truth of this claim. The case of Austin Harrouf attracted significant media attention due to its extreme brutality and ambiguity, both in the courtroom and psychiatric care. The children of the murdered couple, along with the relatives of the injured neighbor, believed that the young man was pretending to be insane and claiming memory loss to be declared incompetent and avoid harsh punishment. Most people following the case shared this belief. The state-appointed psychological and psychiatric expert, Dr. Landrum, reported that Austin's mental illness led to an acute psychotic episode, resulting in the deaths of Michelle and John. However, the prosecutor argued in court that he did not believe the defendant met the legal definition of insanity at the time of the crime. It was suggested that Austin's mental health had worsened due to experimenting with various drugs, using steroids, and having trouble socializing with peers since school. However, at the time of the crime, he was not under the influence of any illegal substances or alcohol, as none were found in his blood, indicating that the reasons for his violent behavior were another reason. During a court hearing, Austin's father disclosed that their family has a history of schizophrenia, and he worried that his son might have inherited this serious illness. Additionally, Austin was suspected of having clinical lycanthropy delusion, a rare disorder. This might explain why he acted like a wild animal and seemed immune to pain, although no psychiatrist confirmed this diagnosis. After receiving treatment, Austin was moved to jail, but the case remains unresolved. He is still awaiting trial, and his lawyers argue that he is mentally ill. Meanwhile, the relatives of John and Michelle and Jeffrey have expressed hopes in interviews that Austin will be deemed competent and sentenced to death for his terrible actions. Hey detectives! Welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Christy Lynn Mullins. Christy Lynn Mullins was born on August 28, 1960, in Columbus, Ohio, one of 6 children in a large family. They lived in a quiet neighborhood, away from the noise and chaos of the city. In the summer of 1975, 14-year-old Christy spent most of her days socializing with friends and family, often going to the local neighborhood swimming pool. In late August, Christy babysat for a family friend on the evening of August 22nd. The next day, August 23rd, she woke up around noon and decided to go swimming to cool off. She invited her sister Kim to join her and they went to the residential area. While Kim went swimming, Christy relaxed on a deck chair. A short time later, Kim went ashore and found Christy nowhere to be seen, but Kim decided not to look for her and instead stayed at the pool. Surprisingly, when Kim returned home, Christy was not there. Hours passed and Christy still hadn't come home. Kim became even more worried. She decided to look for Christy and ran into a neighbor who told her that the police had found the body of a young woman a few miles away, but they had not been able to identify it. Kim rushed home to tell her parents, who immediately called the police to report Christy missing. It was very likely that the body found belonged to Christy, so the police directed them to the morgue for identification. Although it was difficult to recognize the identity of the body due to the severely bruised face, Christy's mother eventually accepted that the body was Christy's, her beloved daughter, thanks to the birthmark on her leg. Police later explained to the family what had happened. It turned out that at about 2:30 p.m. that same day, a man reported finding a body in the woods behind the local shopping center. He, his wife, and son had gone there to buy toys, but before entering the store, their son wanted to take a walk on the trail behind the building. This path was a popular walking path leading to a river and the area was famous for its beauty. Together with his parents, the son went for a walk on this trail. During their hike, they came across a disturbing scene about 10 yards down the trail. A man was kneeling on top of someone and repeatedly beating him with a wooden object. When he saw the family, he immediately ran away. The father rushed to the scene and found a seriously injured little girl covered in blood. His wife, who had medical training, checked the victim's pulse, but there was none. The father quickly went to a nearby shopping center and called the police from a store. He and his wife provided investigators with a detailed description of the suspect, who was a tall, slim young man with long black hair, wearing jean shorts and boots, about 20 years old. Police created a sketch of the suspect based on their description and distributed it to patrol officers. However, the investigation of the crime scene yielded no results. The wooden object used as the murder weapon was found, but they discovered no other evidence linking the perpetrator. Notably, the victim's hands were tied with a telephone cord and her bikini top was pulled down. Her t-shirt and shoes were found next to her body. Despite these signs, forensic experts found no evidence that a sexual assault had occurred. Luckily, detectives were able to continue their investigation thanks to new information from Kim, who told them about a conversation between Christy and a friend, Carol. The police summoned Carol. Carol recounted to police a suspicious phone call she had received from a stranger claiming to be a local DJ. The man had called her to talk about a fake cheerleading competition at the state fair, which was supposedly being held behind the local shopping mall. He announced the event would start at 1:45 p.m. and had told Carol to wait for someone at the entrance to the forest trail. The police were skeptical about Carol's story, and when they dug deeper, they discovered many inconsistencies. According to Carol, she had originally planned to attend the event with her sister. But they had run into Christy and her sister on the way. Carol then invited Christy to join her and they left their sisters behind to go to the mall. However, when they arrived at the entrance to the woods, no one appeared and Carol claimed that she had gone to the shopping center to ask for the time. When she turned around, Christy was gone. The police investigation revealed that there had been no cheerleading competitions in town, casting doubt on the reason for Carol and Christy's trip to the woods. Police suspected that the mysterious phone call might have been a ruse to lure Carol into the woods, but they were unable to trace the call to identify the caller. Further investigation revealed discrepancies in Carol's story. She claimed to have met Christy and her sister on the street, but Kim said they had been at the pool and Carol had come to meet them there. Additionally, Christy's mother reported a strange conversation with Carol later that evening, which raised further suspicions. Carol apologized to Christy's mother and revealed that she had been the intended target of a murder involving two people. However, she quickly retracted her words and left. Christy's mother reported this to the police. The police questioned Carol again, but she denied making a statement and stuck to her original story. Carol was then given a polygraph test, which did not reveal any signs of deception when Carol answered key questions. As a result, investigators shifted focus away from Carol and pursued other leads. Police intensified their search for the killer 3 days after Christy's murder. A police officer patrolling the streets of Columbus spotted a man who bore a striking resemblance to a sketch of Christy's killer. Patrol officers quickly called detectives to the scene and asked Jack to accompany them to the station for questioning. The man, Jack Carmen, 25, agreed to go with them. However, the police soon realized that Jack was severely mentally disabled, with an IQ of about 50 points. Results based on many different tests. As a result, Jack had limited communication skills and could not read or write. He was cared for by a specialist medical facility and lived in a supervised apartment. Despite these challenges, detectives could not ignore the striking resemblance between Jack and the composite sketch of the suspect in Christy's case. The interrogation process was extremely difficult due to Jack's limited ability to understand and answer questions. Most of the time, he just answered with one word or stayed silent. The detectives began to question whether Jack was capable of fully understanding their questions. To improve the situation, they had to ask very simple and specific questions. After 6 hours of questioning, detectives were finally starting to get results. They were finally able to extract a confession from Jack. According to his testimony, on the day in question he had left his apartment, taken the bus to the shopping center and bought a shirt and pants. As Jack walked through the parking lot, he saw Christy sitting on a fence near the entrance to a wooded trail. He approached her, tied her up by tying her hands, and then dragged her into the woods where he carried out the assault. After the attack, Christy tried to run away, but Jack quickly caught up with her. He picked up a nearby piece of wood and repeatedly hit her in the head. Jack then ran to the main road in front of the shopping center and boarded the bus. The next day, police took Jack to the forest where he allegedly committed the crime. There, he pointed out the exact spot and provided specific details that only the perpetrator would know, including the fact that the piece of wood used to strike the victim broke in half. Investigators also verified the testimony, asking the couple who found Christy to identify the person they had seen on the day of the incident. Both identified the man they had seen as Jack. As a result, Jack was charged with multiple offenses, including assault and murder. The prosecution chose to include it in the charges. The prosecutor initially sought the death penalty, but Jack's lawyer negotiated a deal. In exchange for a life sentence, Jack would plead guilty before the judge, thereby avoiding execution. The case moved swiftly, with thousands of people following. Just 11 days after the murder, on September 3rd, Jack was sentenced to life in prison. However, after the trial, public opinion began to shift, and many people started to question Jack's guilt. As more details about his confession and his background emerged in the media, people began to wonder whether he was truly capable of committing such a heinous crime. Those who knew Jack found it hard to believe that he was capable of the crime. He was a passive, timid, and compliant person who would agree to anything if pushed hard enough. In the past, he had even taken the blame for something he didn't do, like the time he claimed responsibility for breaking a boiler at a charity center, when in fact someone else was to blame. This behavior raised doubts about his ability to make a genuine confession to the crime. His supporters felt that the police must have manipulated him into confessing by feeding him information and asking pressured questions. For instance, if the police asked him if he hit the victim with a piece of wood, and he answered yes, they could use that as a confession. However, this approach can be unreliable, especially considering Jack's tendency to confess to anything when under threat. Even the mention of the electric chair was enough to make him agree to whatever the detectives wanted. Furthermore, the police took Jack to the crime scene at the same time as the witnesses, a married couple who later identified him at the police station. This raised concerns that the witnesses had been biased, as they had already seen Jack and knew he was a suspect, despite the police's claims that they never crossed paths. There were several red flags surrounding Jack's alleged involvement in the crime. For instance, the police failed to locate the bus driver or any passengers who claimed to have seen Jack on his way to the city center, which contradicted his own statement. Moreover, multiple people at the charity organization building where Jack lived and worked said to have seen him at around 1:30 p.m. This created a major timing issue. Even if Jack had left immediately after being seen by these witnesses, the bus ride to the shopping center on the outskirts of town would have taken at least 40 minutes. Given the crime was committed at 1:50 p.m., it was logistically impossible for Jack to have made it on time. This cast serious doubts about Jack's guilt and raised suspicions that the police may have coerced his confession. Christy's parents, too, began questioning whether Jack was the true culprit. At the height of the controversy, approximately 70 individuals gathered in front of City Hall on September 9th to draw attention to the case and advocate for a comprehensive investigation. They established a public committee aimed at securing justice for Jack. As a result, Jack was assigned a new lawyer, who swiftly petitioned for a case review. After several months, a judge dismissed Jack's original confession and ordered a new trial, putting the onus on the prosecution to establish his guilt from the beginning. This marked a daunting challenge for the prosecution, making their case almost unviable. Norman Mills, Christy's father, began his own investigation while preparations for the new trial were underway. Dissatisfied with the way the detectives had worked, Norman took matters into his own hands. Immediately after the murder, Norman and several neighbors searched the area where Christy was found. They discovered a bloody pair of jean shorts and men's underwear in the woods. They turned the items over to the police, who had initially missed them. It was unclear whether these items were related to the case or if they had been examined for evidence. Jack's new trial began in 1977, 2 years after the murder. The defense had two tasks: first and foremost, to prove Jack's innocence and also to try to identify the real killer. In fact, they already had a pretty strong candidate for the role, who they considered to be the prime suspect. The man who found Christ's body along with his wife was Henry Newell, who was 25 years old at the time of the murder. At the beginning of the trial, Jack's lawyers had amassed an impressive list of reasons to suspect Henry of murder, and during the trial, the list grew even longer. Initially, Henry attracted attention because of his criminal record. Beginning in his teenage years, he had been arrested multiple times for various crimes, serving 3 prison sentences. He had successfully escaped from prison twice before being captured and brought back. At the time of Jack's trial, he was serving his 4th sentence, this time for burning down a house to collect insurance money. Lawyers also reviewed evidence from Christ's case and found some very suspicious details in his testimony. Henry said he had found her body, ran over, and threw a bloody piece of wood aside. He explained this by saying that he was in a state of shock at the time. But acting like that still seemed odd. Why did he pick up the murder weapon and throw it from his body for no apparent reason? He also testified that he thought the girl was still alive, so he took off his shirt and pressed it to her face. This action also raised questions. Did he actually try to stop the bleeding, or was his shirt stained with blood during the murder, and he needed to justify it somehow? Jack's lawyer found a store clerk in the mall where Henry had run to call the police. She said he was not wearing a shirt but was wearing jean shorts, although by the time police arrived, he was wearing a different pair of pants. The employee also confirmed that Henry had a new bruise on his face, as if someone had hit him. When asked why she didn't immediately report this to the police, she said no one had asked her. The officers themselves should have noticed this bruising but ignored it. Henry also agreed to take a polygraph test, but he ended up vomiting right on the machine. Another witness was Henry's neighbor, who said that on the night of the murder, he had talked to Henry and noticed many new scratches on his hands. The man also mentioned seeing a telephone cord in Henry's garage that was the same color and shape as the cord used to tie the victim's hands. That's not all. The neighbor said that Henry had once told him a very strange story. He claimed to know Christ's 14-year-old friend Carol and that they had once swum naked together in the pool. This story shocked everyone involved in the case. It turned out that Henry was acquainted with Carol, who was also directly involved in the case. His wife, Pam, also testified in court, saying everything had happened exactly as they told police on the first day. They had gone to the mall, and their son wanted to go for a walk. They went into the woods and found the body. Pam added that up until that point, Henry had remained at home and only stepped outside for a few minutes to scare away neighborhood children who had begun throwing firecrackers into their yard. Carol also testified, saying she had never met Henry. She was also asked about her intentions in telling Christ's mother that things should not have escalated to this point, but Carol again claimed she did not remember saying anything like that. Henry himself repeated his story without any changes and insisted that he had nothing to do with the crime. One of the most important moments of the trial was the showing of the entire recording of Jack's interrogation. After watching it, it became clear to everyone that Jack had simply been forced to confirm the detective's words that he had committed murder. Jack barely said anything and didn't seem to fully understand what the police wanted from him. But that was not the most important moment of the trial. On the 5th day, another unexpected witness appeared. It was Bobby, Henry's stepson, and his testimony truly shocked everyone following the case. Bobby revealed that that day, Henry had indeed gone out of the house to chase away the children who had thrown firecrackers into the yard. When Henry returned home, his shirt and sandals were missing, and Henry had scars on his hands and face. Bobby was told by his parents that they would be going to the shopping center, but when they arrived, they instead took him on a walk in the woods behind the center. Bobby claims he never asked to go for a walk, which contradicts what his parents initially said. During the walk, they found Henry's torn sandal and then Christy's body. Bobby's mother instructed him not to tell anyone about what he saw. At the trial, Bobby's grandmother testified about a disturbing comment made by Henry during Christy's farewell ceremony. After expressing her sadness about Christy's death, Henry replied, "It will teach her to keep her mouth shut." Another witness, Henry's friend, came forward and said that Henry had confessed to him that he accidentally killed Christy. Although the evidence clearly pointed to Henry's involvement, the prosecutor surprisingly announced that they would not pursue a case against Henry. The prosecutor also claimed that the initial investigation was handled correctly, despite acknowledging that the police missed or ignored many clues from the beginning. The public was outraged by this decision, leading the prosecutor to change his mind 2 days later and agree to reopen the investigation into Christy's death. Christy's father refused to give up on seeking justice and filed a civil lawsuit against Jack, but not because he believed Jack was involved in the murder. Rather, he hoped to gain access to the case files and gather more information. Unfortunately, this effort also proved unsuccessful. The case had remained stagnant until 2013, when Henry died of terminal cancer. Despite this, in the same year, former attorney John Aller became interested in the case and conducted his own investigation. He contacted all parties involved in gathering new information. Christy's relatives had provided John with a box of records that Christy's father had collected. After reviewing the records and talking to dozens of people, John believed that Henry was the culprit behind Christy's murder. John's investigation revealed that Carol had bought marijuana from Henry, which made him suspect that Henry was involved in the crime. This new discovery created a possible connection between Henry and Carol, which could explain why Carol brought Christy to the forest. One theory is that Carol planned to meet Henry in the forest to buy an illegal substance. It's possible that Carol invited Christy along, using the DJ story as a cover. A more sinister explanation suggests that Carol brought Christy to the forest at Henry's request, intending for him to harm her. However, Christy resisted, as evidenced by Henry's injuries, and he ultimately killed her. When John took over the case, Henry had passed away from cancer at the age of 63. However, John continued his work and released a book about Christy's murder. The release of the book sparked a new wave of interest, and Christy's relatives demanded that the investigation be reopened. Some of Henry's relatives also confirmed that Henry was the one who killed the girl. This led to the reopening of the murder investigation in May 2014. Detectives re-examined the evidence, interviewed dozens of people, and reassessed Henry's confession. They re-examined Christy's clothes and found traces of semen, but they were too small for DNA analysis. The investigation lasted until late 2015, when detectives announced that Henry was the one who had committed the crime. But because he had passed away, the case could not go to court. The investigation ended with the conclusion that Henry had left home, gone to the road behind the shopping center, seen Christy alone, and decided to assault her with a telephone cord, taking her deep into the woods. Henry had attacked Christy, injuring her. Then he killed her with a piece of wood. Returning home, Henry recounted the incident to his wife, and the two began to make plans to avoid punishment. For many years afterward, Carol never revealed the truth. Police later apologized to Christy's family for their careless handling of the incident. Hi there, investigators. It's time to uncover the truth behind another case. The case of Diana D. Aiello. Diana Aiello was born in 1959 in Tustin, a suburb of Los Angeles. Her father was in the military, and her mother worked at a local garment factory. At the age of 19, Diana met Kevin Green. When Diana was harassed by several men at a bar, Kevin intervened and chased the men away. In gratitude, Diana bought Kevin a drink. They went on a date a few days later, and their relationship quickly progressed. Kevin was in the process of divorcing his first wife. Kevin and Diana moved in together for a while, and Diana became pregnant. After Kevin's divorce was finalized, they got married. While waiting for their daughter to be born, they rented an apartment in Tustin. Kevin worked as a helicopter mechanic at a nearby Marine Corps base, while Diana stayed home to prepare for the baby's arrival, having previously worked with her mother in a garment factory. By late September 1979, Diana was nearly 9 months pregnant. On the evening of September 30th, Kevin and Diana got into an argument after watching a movie together. The impending birth of their daughter had put a strain on their relationship. To calm down and avoid escalating the situation, Kevin decided to drive to a nearby restaurant. About 40 minutes after the incident, Kevin called the local police department to report that his wife, Diana, had been shot and needed immediate medical attention. Police arrived on the scene shortly after receiving the call. When they entered the apartment, they found Diana lying on the bed, covered in blood, with a head wound that appeared to be a gunshot wound. However, upon closer examination, paramedics later determined that the wound was actually caused by blunt force trauma. When the police checked on Diana, found her alive and provided first aid until the ambulance arrived, they asked Kevin to leave the room. After the paramedics took over, they carefully transported Diana to the hospital. Meanwhile, the police asked Kevin to stay behind to give a statement. He told police that he and his wife had been arguing, so he decided to leave the apartment to calm down and buy some burgers at a fast food restaurant. In his haste, he realized he had left his keys inside, but chose not to go back to get them. Instead, he locked the door and went to his car. As Kevin drove away from the apartment complex, he noticed a truck with its back door open, and an African-American man walking back and forth toward the truck. It was late, around 2 a.m. He drove to the fast food restaurant he frequented, but it was busy, so he went to another location a few miles away. After buying a burger, he drove home, which took 40 minutes. When he arrived, he found the front door wide open. He rushed inside and found his wife, Diana, covered in blood. He immediately called the police. Kevin's story had some suspicious signs, but when the police checked the fast food bag, they found the food was still warm and the receipt confirmed the time and place of purchase, supporting Kevin's story. As a result, the police allowed Kevin to go to the hospital, but not before asking him to provide a blood sample for further investigation. Although DNA analysis was not available at the time, experts could still compare the blood found at the crime scene with Kevin's blood type. When Diana arrived at the hospital, doctors determined that her head wound was not caused by a gunshot. Instead, it was likely inflicted by a small, heavy object. Unfortunately, Diana fell into a coma. The medical team worked diligently for several hours to save both her and her unborn child. After many hours of intense care, they were able to stabilize Diana's condition, but she still required surgery. During the investigation, police asked medical experts to determine whether Diana had been sexually assaulted. The experts confirmed that Diana had indeed been sexually assaulted, finding semen on her body. However, Kevin testified that he and Diana had had sex just hours before the argument. Diana and Kevin's family stayed in the hospital all night. And the next morning, the baby's condition suddenly took a turn for the worse. Doctors tried, but the baby did not survive. Although Diana remained in a coma, her chances of survival had improved. However, doctors warned that she could suffer long-term effects. Although Kevin had an alibi, police were not quick to clear him due to several inconsistencies in his story. He had an argument with Diana just hours before the attack, left his front door unlocked, and spent much of the time on a quick trip to a fast food restaurant. His claim of seeing a suspicious person near his home at night also raised suspicions. However, there was no concrete evidence linking Kevin to the crime. Police are investigating another suspect in a series of similar crimes in the area. A year earlier, a series of break-ins and assaults had occurred in Tustin and surrounding areas with similar modus operandi. In December 1978, a 17-year-old girl was killed after being beaten with a piece of wood and sexually assaulted. 4 months later, a 21-year-old woman was murdered and sexually assaulted. In July 1979, a woman was attacked in her apartment but survived, although she was in a coma for several weeks. Her testimony provided no new leads. Prior to Diana's attack, a similar attack occurred in September 1979, when a 34-year-old woman was murdered. A series of crimes occurred, all with striking similarities to the attack on Diana. The police believed they were dealing with a serial killer and focused their efforts on capturing him. To address the growing concern, the police decided to issue a public warning through the media, specifically targeting women living alone and those living in low-rise apartments, who appeared to be the serial killer's favorite targets. The warning caused panic, and in response, the police increased night patrols in the area. The police began by interviewing and soon received their first leads. Several of the victims' neighbors reported seeing a suspicious white man with thick black hair near their home. Although the description was somewhat vague, the police were able to identify several men who matched and investigate them. Unfortunately, these leads did not lead to any cases. A week after Diana was attacked, her doctors informed her loved ones that she had finally regained consciousness. However, there was a serious concern: Diana was unable to speak or remember anything. According to her doctors, her brain was still recovering. Around the same time, another attack occurred in Tustin. An unknown assailant broke into the apartment of a 24-year-old woman, striking her multiple times with a piece of wood and sexually assaulting her. Tragically, the victim died, and the police were once again unable to catch the perpetrator. Diana spent several days in the hospital, recovering from her injuries. During this time, her mind slowly cleared, but she had lost almost all of her memory. Doctors told her family that her memories might return, but warned them not to remind her of anything, letting her remember on her own. After being stabilized, Diana was discharged from the hospital and her family took her home. Her husband Kevin had to work at the military base, so Diana was sent to live with Diana's parents. 2 weeks later, another attack occurred in the city, similar to the one on Diana. This time, the attacker killed a 17-year-old girl. Diana began attending physical therapy sessions and her condition gradually improved. Although she still could not speak or remember the attack, a breakthrough occurred 6 weeks later during a therapy session. The doctor asked Diana if she could remember who attacked her. To the doctor's surprise, Diana suddenly pointed to her wedding ring. The doctor shared this information with Diana's mother when she came to pick her up. Diana's mother asked her daughter if her husband, Kevin, was the one who attacked her, and Diana nodded. Diana's mother immediately took her to the police station to speak with the chief. After asking Diana a few more questions, the police confirmed that she remembered her attacker and identified him as her husband, Kevin. This new information dramatically changed the course of the investigation. Police suspected that Diana's attack was related to a series of similar incidents in the area, committed by a serial offender. However, Kevin matched the suspect's description, leading police to question whether Kevin could be the culprit behind these attacks. The police asked Diana and her mother to pretend that Diana had not recovered her memory and to return home with Kevin. But they agreed to do so. Meanwhile, the police kept a close watch on Kevin, monitoring his every move in the hope of finding evidence of a crime linked to the serial murders. Crime scene testing revealed evidence under Diana's fingernails, where they found bloody skin particles, in addition to the attacker's semen. After analyzing the evidence, police found a match between the attacker's blood type and Kevin's blood sample, indicating that Kevin was the one who attacked Diana. As for a motive, police suspect that Diana's refusal to have sex with Kevin may have prompted the attack. Although Kevin insists that they had sex earlier that night. The police spoke to Diana, and she remembered the attack clearly, confirming that Kevin was her killer. During the conversation, her mother expressed that they could no longer live with Kevin, and the police decided to arrest him. To protect Diana's family, Kevin was arrested at a store instead of at their home. Despite his arrest, Kevin maintained his innocence. Preparations for the trial lasted 10 months, during which time Diana's health gradually improved. She regained her ability to speak. Diana was cleared of the charges, and her husband was found guilty of assaulting her. Kevin's defense team tried to use his fast food alibi, but it was not enough to disprove Diana's testimony. As a result, Kevin was convicted in November 1980 of the child's murder and assault on Diana. He was sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. Police learned that 2 similar crimes had occurred in their district before Kevin was arrested, but both victims survived. Although the identity of the attacker remains unknown, these incidents raised suspicions that Kevin was involved in other crimes. The attacks stopped abruptly after Kevin was arrested. After Kevin's sentencing, Diana promptly filed for divorce, which Kevin did not contest. Diana then focused on her recovery. When Kevin became eligible for parole, the committee denied his request, a decision that was repeated 3 more times. The serial killer case remained unsolved until 1996, when police reopened the investigation. Semen samples from the victims, which had been stored in a laboratory, were retested. Police wanted to determine who the culprit was, and DNA analysis yielded a surprising result. Gerald Parker, a man arrested the same year as Kevin, was found to have a DNA match to the serial murders. After the DNA match confirmed Parker's involvement in the serial murders, investigators re-examined the attack on Diana. Parker and Kevin worked together on a military base, and Parker owned a dark-colored van, similar to the one described in the attacks. During his initial police interview, Kevin reported seeing an African-American man near a dark-colored truck in front of their home on the day of the attack. This information led police to consider the possibility that Parker was involved in the attack on Diana. While Kevin was in jail, the local prosecutor updated him on the progress of the bedroom basher serial murder investigation. The prosecutor asked Kevin to provide a DNA sample, which he quickly agreed to. While the DNA analysis was underway, police visited Parker in prison to discuss the case. Although they had not yet formally charged him with the attacks, they hoped to gather more information. Parker initially denied any involvement in the crimes, so detectives focused their questioning on the attack on Diana. During questioning, Parker revealed that on the night of the incident, he drove his truck to Kevin's house, intending to circle the neighborhood, looking through the ground floor windows for a victim. However, this time, he heard screaming coming from Kevin and Diana's apartment, and when Kevin left the house, Parker noticed that the door was unlocked, so he waited a few minutes before entering the apartment and attacking Diana. Parker revealed that he did not know Kevin's wife because they worked in different areas of the military base. He also confessed to committing 6 murders and 3 non-fatal attacks. After Parker's confessions, DNA evidence confirmed his guilt and Kevin's innocence. The prosecutor quickly moved to overturn Kevin's sentence, and he was released from prison after 16 years. The case has caused widespread outrage, not only because an innocent man spent nearly half his life in prison, but also because it took so long for police to identify the real killer. When Kevin was released, the state of California paid him $10,000 in compensation, a relatively small amount. Years later, he received an additional $100 for each day he spent in prison, totaling $620,000. Despite Kevin's exoneration, His wife Diana initially refused to believe he was innocent. She had previously claimed that Kevin was her only attacker. However, after DNA evidence from her body matched Parker's, she changed her story. Diana reported that Kevin attacked her before leaving the apartment, and then Parker entered and attacked her as well. However, Parker said that when he entered the house, Diana was lying on the bed without any injuries or signs of distress. He also admitted to hitting her on the head. Diana's family proposed an alternative theory, suggesting that Kevin might have conspired with Parker to commit the crime, which would explain why Kevin left the house that night, leaving the door open. However, Parker denied knowing Kevin, pointing out that the military base was large and many people didn't know each other personally. Parker denied knowing Kevin. Kevin also denied any involvement with Parker, insisting that he would never harm Diana or their unborn daughter. He explained that he left the door open because he didn't want to go back to get the keys after their argument. And he still blames himself for that decision. As for Parker, he was sentenced to death in 1999, but this sentence has yet to be carried out. After years of waiting on death row, California imposed a moratorium on executions, and as a result, Parker remains incarcerated to this day. Hello, crime enthusiasts. Are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Debbie Lynn Randall. Debbie Lynn Randall was born on August 21, 1962, in Marietta, Georgia, to a loving family with two older brothers. Her parents divorced when she was young. Her mother later married a man named Roy, who became Debbie's stepfather. The family lived in a small apartment building. Debbie was a cheerful and sociable child. On the evening of January 13, 1972, after dinner with her family, Debbie went to the laundromat to supervise the laundry. Debbie's home was just a short distance from the laundromat, so her mother wasn't overly concerned about her safety when she was sent to do the laundry. The original plan was for Debbie to go with her brother, but he was feeling unwell, so Debbie's mother sent her husband to pick up the laundry and Debbie went with her stepfather, holding a box of laundry detergent. At the laundromat, Roy put the clothes in 2 washing machines and left, leaving Debbie waiting for the cycle to finish. After the wash, Debbie had to walk home and ask someone to pick up her clean clothes because she couldn't carry them herself. However, when the laundry should have been finished and Debbie still hadn't returned, her mother began to feel uneasy. It was getting dark outside, so she and her husband decided to walk to the laundromat to look for Debbie, but she was nowhere to be found. The employee informed them that Debbie had left the laundromat some time ago and had not returned. The news worried her mother, who began searching the surrounding streets with Roy. As they walked, they discovered a suspicious scene. A short distance from the laundromat, in the parking lot next to a car, there was a spilled detergent. Since Debbie had brought a box of detergent with her, her mother suspected that it might be hers. Despite expanding their search to the entire parking lot and the surrounding area, they found no other sign of Debbie. Neighbors who knew the family joined in the search. Debbie's mother decided to call the police for help. The police investigated the parking lot and discovered their first clue: spilled laundry detergent just inches from a parked car, and on the car door, they found several clear fingerprints. The police found fresh fingerprints on the car that were located lower than the handle, which seemed unusual. They suspected that an unknown person might have grabbed the girl while touching the car at this spot. The officers collected the fingerprints and sent them to forensic experts for analysis. They also started searching for the car's owner to confirm whether the fingerprints belonged to them. With no other leads, the police began a thorough search of the area, looking for new clues or witnesses. The laundry worker reported that she did not see anything suspicious. Debbie had waited for the laundry to finish, then left the building with the detergent box. It is possible that she went home to ask someone to pick up her clothes. Police discovered the first key witness, 12-year-old Sandra, who said that as she and her friend walked to a laundromat to drop off dirty clothes. They saw a man grab a girl on the street, drag her to his car parked near the laundromat, and drive away quickly while she screamed for help. Sandra and her friend were lucky to avoid the man's car. Debbie screamed in a car, but he did not slow down. At the time, Sandra did not consider what she saw to be a kidnapping. She assumed the man was a family member who had come to pick Debbie up, possibly against her will. So Sandra did not report the incident to the authorities or tell any adults about it. After learning about Debbie's disappearance, Sandra provided essential details to investigators. She described the abductor's vehicle as a dark-colored, likely 1957 model pickup truck. She also described the man as young, white, with thick dark hair, wearing a white t-shirt, jeans, and black work boots. Another key witness, a girl who lived in the same building as Debbie, shared her observations. She saw a dark-colored pickup truck drive past the apartment building on the evening in question. The girl initially thought the driver of the car was her uncle, but when he stopped in front of her and looked at her, she realized it was someone else. She described the driver as a white man with medium-length dark hair and provided additional details about his appearance. She also reported that he parked his car near their building, next to the same car where a detergent spill would later be discovered. Another witness, a man who lived near the girl's home, reported that a dark-colored pickup truck, possibly a Dodge, almost hit him while he was driving to visit his wife in the hospital. The driver appeared to be in his 30s with dark hair, and the witness saw a girl in the car trying to escape while the driver held her with one arm. Based on these accounts, the police believed Debbie had been kidnapped. They circulated the suspect's vehicle to all patrol units and created a composite sketch of the driver based on descriptions from witnesses. Some officers searched for similar vehicles and checked their owners, while others conducted a wide-ranging search for the girl. As the days passed, more volunteers and police from surrounding towns joined the search. Police questioned Debbie's family, and after investigation, they were all cleared as potential suspects. Debbie's biological father, who lived in the same city, was notified of her disappearance at work and immediately joined the search effort. Police also ran background checks on convicted criminals who lived near Debbie's home, but none of them appeared to be viable suspects. The search for Debbie continued for over 2 weeks without any significant leads. It wasn't until January 29th, when a group of students joined the search teams, that a breakthrough occurred. The students were sent to search a wooded area several miles from Debbie's house. After nearly 5 hours of searching, one of the students noticed a set of tracks on the ground that led from the trail into the forest, suggesting that something had been dragged into the woods. As they followed the trail about 150 feet into the woods, they discovered a human body and immediately contacted the police. Upon further inspection, they quickly identified the body as Debbie Randall. She was wearing the same outfit her mother had described on the day she went missing. However, her shoes were missing. The medical examination of the Debbie's body revealed that she had been strangled to death and had also been sexually assaulted. A single dark hair was found on her body, which was likely to belong to the killer. Although DNA analysis was not available at the time, experts were able to examine the hair under a microscope and estimate that it came from a man between the ages of 18 and 30. The investigation then focused on the victim's clothing, which was covered in soil. Police enlisted the help of a geologist to analyze the soil, along with a forensic team. They discovered that some of the soil contained a type of soil mined less than 10 miles from their town called North Georgia clay. However, other stains on the clothing were found to be from a different type of clay, mined by a company just 2 miles from where the body was found. Police theorized that the perpetrator did not kill Debbie immediately, but rather drove her to remote areas, sexually assaulting her in one location and killing her in another, before finally dumping her body in the woods. Police believe the killer may have been hired by one of the nearby mining companies. After contacting these companies, the police searched the employees of both companies but did not find the suspect or the vehicle described by the victims. Furthermore, they found fingerprints near the abduction site, but unfortunately, when these fingerprints were compared to the suspects, there was no match. Debbie's death sent shockwaves through the city, with thousands attending her funeral. Police repeatedly ran into roadblocks in their search for clues. Police officer Morris Nix investigated many suspects and eventually narrowed the list down to 4 people. For Morris Nix, Debbie's murder remained a top priority throughout his career. The case took a breakthrough with the creation of the FBI's DNA database. Experts successfully extracted a genetic profile from hair found on Debbie's body, which was then entered into the database. However, no matches were found. In 2015, 43 years after the murder, police reopened the case and decided to re-examine the victim's clothing using modern technology. The clothing had been stored in an evidence vault since the crime. When re-examined, some of the evidence had degraded over time, resulting in only a partial DNA profile. In 2018, Debbie's mother gave an interview, expressing her hope that her daughter's killer would be found. After the tragedy, she found it unbearable to stay in their apartment, so she moved to another city. Her only wish was for the case to be solved before she died. Sadly, she died of cancer at the age of 78, just weeks after the interview, and was buried next to Debbie. In 2019, the local police department received additional funding, which allowed them to conduct a more thorough analysis of Debbie's clothing. This time, experts successfully extracted a full DNA sample, but unfortunately, the perpetrator's DNA was still not found in the FBI database. Debbie's father was interviewed and shared that he thought about his daughter every day for decades. Sadly, he passed away in 2022, shortly after the interview. Police turned their attention to the first piece of evidence they had, DNA. They partnered with a Florida company that specializes in an advanced DNA analysis technique called genomics. Police provided the company with all the biological samples they had collected over the years and waited for the results. Experts created a DNA profile of the suspect and began searching for his relatives in public genetic databases. After analyzing thousands of potential relatives of the killer, investigators narrowed their search to a family in Marietta. In 2023, police asked the family to provide a DNA sample, which they agreed to. Analysis showed that the killer was indeed a close relative of the family. Experts re-examined the family tree and quickly identified a man named William Rose. However, William Rose committed suicide in 1974, just 2 years after Debbie's murder. Police obtained a warrant to exhume William Rose's remains and took a sample of William Rose's DNA for analysis. 51 years after Debbie's murder, police finally identified William Rose as the killer. At the time of the murder, William Rose, 24, lived in the same building as Debbie's family, and he visited them frequently. The case has finally been solved. Debbie's brother, Melvin, is the only living relative. Melvin attended a press conference and expressed gratitude to everyone involved in solving the case that lasted more than 50 years. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore, the case of Tara Baker. Tara Baker was born on January 20, 1977, in East Point, Georgia. Her parents divorced when she was young, and her mother later remarried. She is the eldest of 4 siblings. From an early age, she showed a strong interest in the legal system, with the desire to pursue a career as a lawyer or judge. She would often engage in mock trials with her stuffed animals, create contracts with her relatives, and even write letters to politicians, including the President of the United States, to express her opinions. After high school, Tara attended Georgia College, where she earned 2 bachelor's degrees in just 3 years, graduating in 1999. She then enrolled at the University of Georgia, one of the top law schools in the country, located in Athens, a small town close to her parents' home. To avoid dorm life, Tara rented a house with 2 other university students, one of whom she knew from college. Tara worked at a prestigious law firm in downtown Athens, covering her expenses and gaining valuable experience in her future profession. In January 2001, Tara spent a lot of time studying at the university library. On the evening of January 18th, she went to the library to study with a friend. Her friend left the library around 7:30 p.m. Tara stayed behind, calling her friend at 9:46 p.m. to check if she had arrived home safely, mentioning that she would head home soon. The next day, around 6 p.m., Tara's mother, Virginia Baker, received a phone call from a woman who identified herself as a detective. The detective tells Virginia that they need her daughter Tara's fingerprints for their current investigation. Believing it was a prank, Virginia hung up, but her curiosity got the better of her. She decided to call the Athens police station to verify the call. Police said the caller was actually a forensic detective, and they further informed her that there had been a fire at Tara's home. The detective explained that they were trying to locate Tara, but so far, they had only found one of Tara's roommates, who had been out at the time of the fire. The other roommate was also missing, and investigators suspected that the unidentified body they found might be one of them. Virginia was desperate for information and asked the detective to describe the room where the body was found. The detective's response sent a chill down Tara's spine. The room was filled with Tara antique items, which she had spent years collecting. Virginia and her family immediately drove to Athens to see what was happening to their daughter, hoping that it was just a misunderstanding and that Tara was safe. Upon arriving at the police station, they were forced to wait for several hours without receiving any updates. Eventually, a detective emerged and delivered the devastating news. The body found in the house was indeed Tara's, and her death was a result of murder, not the fire. However, the detective was exhausted and declined to answer any questions. Before departing, he shared one crucial detail: Tara had inadvertently left behind a clue. Fragments of the perpetrator's skin were found under her fingernails, which could potentially aid in identifying the killer. Tara's family was shocked, confused, and hopeless by the news. Despite their requests for more information about Tara, the police remained silent, not providing any further details. The family of Tara Baker was left in the dark about her murder investigation. Despite their repeated attempts to get information from detectives, they were met with silence. The local police department never reached out to them, forcing the family to constantly call and visit the station to beg for updates. Through persistence, they were able to gather some details about the case. Firefighters were called to Tara's address on January 19th at approximately 11 a.m. in response to a fire. After extinguishing the flames, they found Tara's body inside. The medical examiner's report confirmed that she had been murdered, with signs of strangulation and stab wounds. It appeared that the killer had set the fire to destroy evidence after Tara's death. However, the police refused to share the medical examiner's report with Tara's parents, leaving them without crucial information about her murder. The family also discovered that some evidence may have been destroyed by the firefighters. Unfortunately, this is not uncommon in cases like this. Investigators may not have properly secured the crime scene, which could have resulted in the loss of evidence. As Tara's family sought answers about her death, they were met with a lack of transparency and disrespect from the police. They were not kept informed about the investigation, were often treated rudely and unprofessionally. In an attempt to hold the police accountable, they began to record their conversations and filed complaints, but these efforts yielded no results. The family sought the advice of a renowned criminologist. However, the local police department would only allow him to review the case materials under one condition: he was not to share any information or findings with Tara's relatives. This left Tara's family unable to find answers about her death. Tara's family waited 10 years to get her death certificate. After writing to the state governor, they finally received it, but it didn't give them the answers they were looking for. Instead of explaining what caused her death, the certificate simply stated that she died from multiple injuries, without providing any further details. Despite the police continued their investigation, but their actions raised several questions. When Tara's body was discovered, firefighters immediately called the police, recognizing that a murder had taken place. But the crime scene was seriously destroyed due to extensive damage from the fire and water used to extinguish it. Furthermore, the family later discovered that some surviving items at the crime scene were not examined for fingerprints. Tara's laptop was found missing from her room, but other valuables were intact. Since there was no evidence of forced entry, investigators suspected that Tara was familiar with her killer and had voluntarily allowed them into her room. Although the crime scene was heavily damaged due to the fire, investigators established that Tara's two roommates were away from town at the time, leaving Tara home alone. Because it was difficult to determine the exact time of death, medical experts narrowed the window down to a time frame of 10 p.m., when Tara left the library, to 11 a.m., when neighbors called the fire department. The likelihood of the crime occurring during the early morning hours, given the speed at which the fire spread. The police investigation uncovered two significant leads. One involved a witness who reported seeing a middle-aged white man running down the street on the morning of the murder, wearing only a t-shirt and jeans despite the winter weather. Additionally, the police discovered a suspicious phone call made to Tara's university a few days before her death. A heavily intoxicated man had called the university's student information line. The man managed to correctly provide Tara Baker's name and request her phone number. Although the phone call was highly suspicious, the police were unable to identify the caller. Meanwhile, Tara's boyfriend became an immediate person of interest in the investigation. He provided an alibi, which was verified by the police, but they continued to view him with suspicion. Police have repeatedly questioned him and asked him to provide additional biological samples, answer additional questions, or undergo a lie detector test. Tara's boyfriend was asked to identify her body after the fire. He had traveled from another city to Athens as soon as he heard the news. Although Tara's parents were already in town, the police requested that the boyfriend make the identification. However, he was not allowed to enter the house. Instead, a police officer took a photograph of the body and showed it to him on a camera screen. The boyfriend was shocked and unsure if the body was Tara's. To confirm, he asked to see a pair of earrings he had given her. The officer retrieved the earrings from the body Tara's and showed them to him. After seeing the earrings, the boyfriend confirmed that the body was indeed Tara's. The police then shifted their focus to a male student who had a reputation for being troublesome. Several female students reported that he had repeatedly asked them out on dates, despite being told no, and made them feel uncomfortable with his behavior. The student had also asked Tara out multiple times, despite knowing she had a boyfriend. Detectives investigated the student but found no evidence linking him to the crime. They even asked Tara's friends to monitor the boy's activities, but this did not bring any new progress. Detectives began to focus on another suspect, a guy who was Tara's co-worker. When they interviewed his co-workers, they discovered that his behavior in the days leading up to the murders was very strange. Specifically, he had stopped socializing with a group of close co-workers. Additionally, just days before the murders, he had told Tara that he would not be able to attend her birthday party, which was scheduled for the day after the murders. On the morning of January 19th, one of Tara's co-workers tried to convince him to attend birthday celebration, as Tara had been hurt by his initial refusal. When the colleague visited the attorney's office, however, he was nowhere to be found. This was unusual, as the attorney was typically present at the office in the mornings. A check of his work schedule revealed no meetings or appointments, adding to the mystery of his absence. His behavior raised suspicions after Tara's murder. He was absent on the day of the murder, but the next day, he visited a colleague's home and acted strangely. Many suspect that he regularly used illegal drugs, which may have contributed to his erratic behavior. The co-worker noticed several fresh scratches on his neck, which were notable because several pieces of skin were found under Tara's fingernails, suggesting that she may have scratched her attacker in self-defense. When questioned about the scratches, he claimed he got them from a cat and denied any involvement in Tara's murder. However, when asked about his suspicions regarding the killer, his response was unusual. He screams that Tara's father is the culprit, but he cannot produce any evidence to back up his accusation. Furthermore, he resigned from his position just a few months after the murder and left the state. It is unclear whether the police compared his DNA with the samples found under Tara's nails. But they have not shared any information about this aspect of the investigation, even with Tara's relatives. The police discovered that he was married, but still secretly dated two female colleagues. This revelation could explain his unusual behavior and unexplained absences from work. Both women also suspected that he was using illicit substances. However, police found no evidence to prove his involvement in the murder and eventually cleared him as a suspect. The detectives also investigated the maintenance company employees who had access to the house where Tara lived. They had a spare key, which might explain why there was no sign of forced entry. Unfortunately, this lead also yielded no results. Since then, the case has had no new clues. The police continue to search for new suspects and witnesses, but they are keeping many details about their investigation under wraps to avoid it being undermined. The investigation into Tara's murder continued over the years, with several new leads emerging, but it did not yield any results for the investigation. One witness reported seeing an African-American man near Tara's house on the day of the fire, while another claimed to have seen blood on a classmate's notebook shortly after the murder. Despite police efforts to pursue these leads, they ultimately led to dead ends. Tara's parents offered a $77,000 reward in hopes of generating new leads. The detective team working on the case changed several times, but they all encountered considerable difficulties due to lack of evidence. The fire in Tara's room burned most of the evidence, leaving the police with few clues to investigate. 19 years after Tara's murder, a podcast about her case was released, generating renewed interest and attention. The podcast gathered information from Tara's family and individuals connected to the case, re-examining the evidence and helped reinvestigate the case. The police department took notice of the podcast, leading to better cooperation between detectives and Tara's family. For several months, detectives reviewed all available information and evidence, using modern DNA analysis tools to re-examine the evidence. Their efforts paid off on May 13, 2024, when police announced that they had finally arrested the perpetrator, 23 years after the murder. The suspect, Edric Lamont Faust, 48, was arrested, but police did not reveal how they identified the suspect, citing the need to keep some information secret to protect ongoing legal proceedings. Investigators only mentioned that modern DNA analysis tools and other biological evidence played a crucial role in Edric's identification. Further details of the case were not disclosed at the press conference, and police chose to withhold evidence to avoid compromising Edric's trial. However, his arrest documents revealed that he was accused of assaulting Tara. Additionally, a piece of skin was found under Tara's fingernails, which was used to extract the killer's DNA using modern DNA analysis tools. The police had likely known about Edric for years due to his long history of crime, which included multiple arrests. At the time of Tara's murder, he was 25 and lived in the same city as she. Despite this, the police initially found no evidence suggesting that Edric knew Tara. It wasn't until recently, thanks to advanced DNA analysis, that Edric became a suspect in the case. Detectives only started investigating him a few days before his arrest. Edric is currently in jail awaiting trial. The police are confident that they have found the right person, as they obtained irrefutable DNA evidence. As a result, Edric was denied bail, and Tara's case is now considered closed. Tara's family finally finds out the truth after 23 years. Thanks to a new team of detectives who reopen the case and solve it. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery, the case of Mitzi Sanchez. Mitzi Sanchez was born on August 10, 1992, in Vallejo, California. She grew up in a large, with 2 brothers and a sister. As a child, Mitzi was cheerful and bright, enjoying time outdoors with friends and playing with her siblings. From a young age, she demonstrated independence, often walking to elementary school with her brother without adult supervision, as the school was nearby. On August 10, 2000, Mitzi's 8th birthday, she was excited about the celebration party her family had planned. However, when she asked her mom if she could skip school, the request was denied. Upset, Mitzi left her home with her brother at around 7:30 a.m. The plan was for her to wait for her brother after classes, and they would walk home together. But when her brother went outside the school, he couldn't find Mitzi. Assuming she had already left without him, he headed home alone. However, when he arrived home, Mitzi had disappeared without a trace. Mitzi's older sister grew concerned when she realized Mitzi was missing, especially since her birthday party was supposed to take place that day. As her absence seemed unusual, the sister called their mother around 4 p.m. to report the situation. The mother immediately contacted Mitzi's school and confirmed that Mitzi had attended all her classes that day. However, when the mother reached out to family members and Mitzi's friends, no one had seen her after school. Mitzi's family became worried and started looking for her. Family, friends, and neighbors mounted a massive search operation. Some walked the streets, while others went door to door along the route from her home to school, asking locals if they had seen her. They also distributed flyers with information about Mitzi. Despite their extensive efforts, they were unable to find her, leading Mitzi's parents to call 911 for assistance. The police quickly joined the search and local media started covering the case. The news of Mitzi's disappearance spread quickly, not just in local news outlets but also across the state. Mitzi's family has given several interviews to raise awareness of her disappearance. Her mother desperately pleaded with them to return her daughter safely. The police received a lot of information, but none of it was useful. 24 hours after Mitzi went missing, the investigation had new clues. A man contacted the police to report finding bloody rags at a landfill. After further examination, experts discovered that the rags were actually bed sheets from a hotel in Vallejo. The evidence was sent to the lab for analysis, but it would take several days to obtain the results. Investigators also went to the hotel, but they were unable to confirm whether Mitzi was there. As the investigators waited for the lab results, they thoroughly searched the landfill for any additional clues, but they found nothing. However, the next day, August 12, the police received a call that changed the course of the investigation. At around 11 a.m., a man called the police to report a disturbing incident. While driving through an industrial area in Santa Clara, he saw a little girl running towards his van, screaming that someone was chasing her. The girl quickly got into the van, and the driver saw a man running in their direction. A young girl escaped from her kidnapper and sought help from a van driver. As soon as she got into the truck, the kidnapper quickly fled the scene. The girl, who identified herself as Mitzi Sanchez, told the driver what had happened, and he immediately contacted the police. The officers quickly took Mitzi to a hospital for a medical examination. They also arranged for her to speak with her mother over the phone, and soon her relatives arrived at the hospital, where they were reunited with Mitzi. The van driver proved to be a valuable witness in the investigation. He was able to provide the police with the license plate number of the kidnapper's vehicle, which he had seen as it sped away. The truck driver happened to be on the road that day, which was lucky. If he hadn't been there, the kidnapper might have caught up with Mitzi. The police checked the license plate and discovered that the car belonged to 39-year-old Curtis Dean Anderson, a man with a history of crime. He had previous convictions for theft and kidnapping and was also suspected of other offenses. Police took a statement from Mitzi about what happened to her. Mitzi recounted that on August 10th, she was excited to finish school and head home to celebrate her birthday with her family. When her last class ended, she decided not to wait for her brother and walked home alone. As she walked, she noticed a car parked by the side of the road about a few hundred yards away. Inside, a man was watching her through the rearview mirror. The girl felt uncomfortable, but she was not worried because it was daytime and she was walking on a familiar street. In addition, because she was young, she was not aware of the potential risks posed by strangers. Mitzi was approached by a man who got out of his car and asked for her help. He claimed to have a leg injury from an accident and needed assistance in retrieving a roll of tape from under the car seat. Despite feeling uneasy, Mitzi agreed to help, as her parents had taught her to assist others in need. However, as soon as Mitzi reached for the tape, the man's intentions became clear. He pushed her into the car, covered her mouth, and slammed the door shut. Mitzi tried to scream, but it was too late. The man drove away, Mitzi to watch in horror as they passed by her home, where her family was preparing to celebrate her birthday. The man eventually stopped in a deserted parking lot, where he gave Mitzi new clothes and forced her to change. He then threw away her old clothes in a nearby trash bin. He warned Mitzi not to try to escape, claiming he had a gun and that no one had ever managed to escape from him. For the next few hours, Mitzi was driven to an unknown location. Mitzi demanded to know why she had been kidnapped. But the man's response was that he had gone through a similar experience as a child. When night fell, he stopped the car again and began covering the windows with rags to conceal their location. He then shackled Mitzi's leg with a chain and padlock. The man pulled out a bottle of alcohol and insisted that Mitzi drink some. Despite her initial reluctance, she eventually gave in. He took pictures of her using a camera. The perpetrator then lay down in the car to sleep. Fearing that she would be at his mercy if she fell asleep, Mitzi stayed awake and began thinking of an escape plan. Her chance came when she saw a police car driving past the parking lot. However, it was too far away, and she realized that even if she screamed, the officers would not be able to hear her. The next day, the perpetrator continued to drive Mitzi around the city, forcing her to sit on the floor of the car and covering her with sheets to conceal her from view. At one point, he briefly stepped out of the vehicle, giving Mitzi an opportunity to try and escape. She attempted to free her leg from the chain but quickly realized it was impossible. She also found a nail file and tried to use it to unlock the padlock, but unfortunately, it didn't work. When the perpetrator returned to the car and drove away, he made a disturbing claim: he had stopped by Mitzi's parents' house. Under the guise of a good citizen, he asked for flyers to distribute around town, further manipulating the situation. Mitzi was left feeling shocked and overwhelmed, knowing she had been so close to home yet still remained in captivity. Over the next few hours, the perpetrator repeatedly stopped the car, getting in and out. Eventually, he drove to a remote area outside of town and parked. There, he committed a sexual assault against Mitzi, leaving her in a state of shock. Afterward, the perpetrator fell asleep. The next morning, he resumed driving, making several stops to buy cigarettes and alcohol. When he returned to the car and leaned into the cabin, an object fell out of his pocket. He warned Mitzi not to look, but she disobeyed. She glanced down and saw a large set of keys. Mitzi quickly realized that one of the keys could open the lock on her chain. Although afraid of the perpetrator's possible reaction, Mitzi was brave enough to act. She grabbed the keys, selected one that seemed to fit the lock best, and tried to unlock it. To her relief, the key worked. Mitzi managed to free herself from the chain and moved towards the car door, which was the last barrier between her and freedom. To escape, she opened the window and tried to climb out. However, her body was exhausted, and her legs had almost no strength left. Using the last of my strength, she pushed herself upwards and finally jumped out of the car. As she moved around it, she spotted her kidnapper, who instantly saw her as well. He yelled for her to come back, but Mitzi had no intention of surrendering. She took off in the opposite direction, and her kidnapper started chasing after her. As she fled, she attempted to get help from passing cars by waving her hands and screaming, but all the cars ignored her pleas and kept driving by. Not losing hope, Mitzi kept running forward. In her desperate situation, every moment seemed like an eternity. Mitzi is driven by the fear that if she stops even for a moment, she will be captured by the perpetrator, a fate she is determined to avoid. Finally, she spotted a van and she ran towards it, jumping in front of it to stop the driver. The driver quickly halted, and Mitzi climbed into the cabin, exhausted, dehydrated, and starving, but safe. At the hospital, she received the medical attention she needed, and her family soon arrived to be reunited with her. Mitzi's story quickly became top news in town. When she returned home, thousands of people gathered on her street, cheering and shouting birthday wishes she had missed while in captivity. Meanwhile, the police were searching for her kidnapper, whose location remained unknown. During the investigation, the police showed Mitzi's mother a photo of the suspect, and she recognized him. She had seen him twice before, once before Mitzi's abduction, when he was standing on their street, staring at their house, and again the day after Mitzi's disappearance, when he came to their home asking for flyers. Police eventually arrested the suspect, Curtis. He confessed to Mitzi that she was not his first victim and that no one had ever managed to escape him before. Curtis's careful planning and execution suggested he had experience with similar crimes. It is notable that Curtis had a prior conviction for kidnapping a woman in 1991, for which he served time until his release in November 1999. The trial began in April of the same year. Mitzi bravely testified in a crowded courtroom, recounting every detail of Curtis's crimes against her. Even though Curtis was there, Mitzi remained calm and completed his mission. As a result, Curtis received a 251-year prison sentence. However, this marked the beginning of a new chapter in the investigation. Detectives regularly visited Curtis in jail, questioning him about potential involvement in other crimes. One of these visits, they discovered that Curtis had confessed to a fellow inmate about kidnapping and murdering 8 additional girls. The inmate agreed to cooperate with the police, sharing Curtis's confession in detail. However, Curtis himself was reluctant to reveal all his secrets. Instead of denying the allegations, he attempted to negotiate privileges in exchange for information, speaking with detectives in riddles. As for Mitzi, she was constantly bullied and ridiculed by her classmates, labeling her the kidnapped girl. They even told her she should have died instead of being rescued. The constant bullying made her school years extremely difficult, which hindered her recovery from the traumatic experience. Mitzi could no longer handle the immense pressure. As a result, she turned to alcohol as a means of coping with stress, relying more and more on it. Eventually, she lost hope of returning to a normal life. However, a car accident after a party with friends changes her life forever. Mitzi suffered serious injuries, including a broken neck and arm, and spent 2 weeks in a coma. Upon waking up, she received news from her doctors. She was pregnant with a daughter. This gave Mitzi the power to change her life for the better. She decided to devote herself entirely to her daughter and also to helping other children who were victims of various crimes. Mitzi went on to found a non-profit organization that continues to help those in need to this day. As for Curtis, he passed away in 2007 due to illness, just 6 years after being sentenced. The detectives' only regret was that they were unable to obtain full confessions from him regarding other cases he was suspected of being involved in. Notably, his son followed a similar path and was also convicted of murder. Unfortunately, the son's life was cut short in prison in 2019.